In the cold, silent hall of Pearl City, a maid trembles as she serves tea. Her eyes remain fixed on the floor, never daring to look at the woman in the fur-covered chair. Hill, the mistress of the city, sits with a terrifying composure. Across from her, an envoy from Grand Duke Edmund stands frozen. He was sent to invite her to a banquet, but he has forgotten his words. No one warned him that the Lady of Pearl City was blind. A thick white bandage wraps around Hill's forehead. Beneath the fabric, a bright red liquid seeps steadily, trickling down her cheeks, dripping from her chin. Tick, tock. The envoy swallows hard. 7 days, he manages to say. The Grand Duke expects her in 7 days. Hill reaches up, her fingers tracing the wet bandage. She dabs the blood and rubs it between her fingertips. I have not been feeling well, she says evenly. If the Duke is in a hurry, he may come here. Or would he prefer I appear at his banquet, looking like this? Terrified, the messenger flees. He felt it, an unsettling aura, as if Hill could read his every thought despite her ruined eyes. Left alone, Hill sinks into the unfamiliar sting of vulnerability. She remembers the beauty of her eyes, before she dug them out with her own hands. It was the price of her journey into the ruins. Days ago, she watched her subordinates succumb to parasites that exploded from their sockets. Hill believed she was different. She was the master of holification, a rare ability to phase through physical reality. She thought she was untouchable. But deep within the ruins, she encountered something that did not care for physical laws. It wasn't a monster, it was a gaze. A line of sight from a higher being that pierced through every dimension. In an instant, her mind was flooded with a deluge of forbidden knowledge, past, future, life, and death, surging like an ocean into a single raindrop. To save her sanity, she had to tear the vision away. She had to gouge out her own eyes. Now she sits in the dark. She knows the northern nobles are watching, waiting for her to stumble. She cannot hide her blindness, so she chooses to wear it as a grim warning. She has paid a heavy price for her arrogance, and now she can only wait, hoping that the power she gained in the darkness is enough to keep her from losing everything. Diona was awakened not by the sun, but by the sharp tip of his own spear poking his cheek. Get up, get up, get up. The weapon shrieked, the sun is high and you're sleeping like a pig. Do you want Minister Chesvia to roast us alive for being late? Diona opened his eyes to find a mouth, a literal wet mouth growing out of the spear's shaft, shouting inches from his face. This was the red rose of exorcism, a sentient, loud-mouthed mind blade that insisted on its full, artistic title. Diona sighed, glancing at his other weapon leaning against the wall, the yellow rose. That sword was a mute, and thankfully much more useful. As Diona stretched, the savory aroma of spiced meat broth wafted from the kitchen. He walked to the doorway and stopped. There, the slender yellow rose hovered over the stove, its blade stirring a pot of soup with practiced, rhythmic grace. Yellow Rose, thank you for your hard work, Diona murmured. The sword trembled slightly in a silent greeting. It was a bizarre sight, a legendary blade chopping vegetables and simmering stew, but Diona couldn't argue with the taste. After a quick breakfast, Diona gathered the lunchboxes prepared by the sword and set off for the ruins of the fallen city, now known as the 9th Recovery Facility. Inside the facility's living quarters, he found Evelyn lounging on a deck chair, looking more like she was on vacation than on a mission. "Which number are you today?" Diona asked. "Number 4, she replied, popping a grape into her mouth. "This body is for relaxing." The red rose spear suddenly chimed in. "You've gained weight, number 4. Evelyn's gaze turned icy, and Diona quickly hurried deeper into the facility toward the central research area. There, Minister Chesvia stood staring at a transparent container. Inside floated a clump of hair, the same cursed object that had nearly killed Diona weeks ago by piercing his skin and seizing control of his nervous system. "Minister," Diona said, setting down the food. "Any progress?" Chesvia turned, her eyes gleaming with a cold intensity. "A major breakthrough. This hair is the physical manifestation of curses and causality. Ropes woven from it can bind fate itself." Diona blinked, confused. Chesvia sighed, explaining it simply. "If we have allies ready to stab us in the back, we weave their hair together with this. By mornings, they are either the best of friends, forced to share every pain and joy, or," she paused dramatically, "they have all gone completely mad." The research area fell into a heavy silence as Chesvia finished speaking. Diona stared at the clump of hair floating in a transparent container, a sight that felt deeply wrong. Red Rose, the sentient spear, broke the quiet with a sharp exclamation. "What do you mean by all gone mad?" she demanded. "Is it more powerful than my mouth?" Diona offered a quick comfort, but Chesvia ignored the narcissistic weapon, turning instead to the lunchbox Diona had brought. As Chesvia ate the meal of rose broth and toast, Diona pressed for answers. "What does it mean to go mad?" Chesvia's voice was cold. "It is forced empathy. Two fates are linked. You feel everything the other feels: joy, pain, fear, anger, all synchronized. If your wills are not strong enough, or if you are enemies, you break." Diona shuddered at the thought of feeling an enemy's every emotion. Chesvia explained that while the hair is a tool for madness, it could also force unity, if it could be woven. But the material is too dangerous to touch, and Chesvia is no tailor. "We wait," she shrugged, "or we package it as a gift. We label it the rope of fate and let our enemies bind themselves." Red Rose cackled at the cruelty of the idea. Meanwhile, at the eastern border, the executioner Sylvie returned to headquarters. His adjutant, disguised in a familiar, unremarkable face, rode alongside him. They had withdrawn from Holy Spring City due to a crisis at the Chapel of Skinners. Sylvie suspected his master had failed and was now forcing him to clean up the mess. Upon reaching the camp, Sylvie found the atmosphere frantic. He cornered a trembling priest who claimed their master had captured the Pope of the Spirit Garden and sent him to the Pale Temple for judgment. A high-ranking monk tried to spin a heroic tale of the master's victory, but Sylvie wasn't buying the propaganda. "If he were that capable," Sylvie mocked, "he wouldn't need me." Sylvie marched to the prison cages deep in the valley. There he found Bishop Shukro, battered but defiant. Without hesitation, Sylvie ordered his release, not out of mercy but for information. He leveled his sword at the other prisoners, his voice turning lethal. "Answer me," Sylvie commanded Shukro, "or for every question you miss, one of them dies." Under Sylvie's relentless threats, Shukro had no choice but to speak. He hesitated for only a heartbeat, a second too long, and the judge beside Sylvie slit a prisoner's throat in one smooth motion. Warm, sticky blood splattered across Shukro's face. "Continue," Sylvie commanded, his voice cold and sharp. Through the man's trembling answers, the story emerged. The chief priest had led the vast army of the Pale Church to besiege the Chapel of Skinners. Even the legendary Saluin could not withstand such a force. The priest entered the chapel alone, and when he emerged, he was transformed, powerful, sharp, a completely different man. He had sent for Sylvie immediately before retreating to the Pale Temple. Sylvie pondered the news. He understood his master's impatience. Without a word to Shukro, he gathered his adjutant and rushed toward the Pale Temple, the heart of a sovereign city-state that stood independent of the kingdom's laws. Inside the magnificent, inhumanly crafted temple, the doors swung open. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood before a massive mural of the Pale Goddess. "You're back," the figure said. Sylvie froze, the voice. It sounded like a young man. When the figure turned, Sylvie's eyebrows twitched. The face was youthful, sharp features and smooth skin, yet Sylvie knew this man was over 50 years old. "It looks like you've put on that skin," Sylvie remarked, stepping closer to scrutinize the transformation. "What price must you bear?" "These are the remains of a god," the chief replied frankly. "No human could bear the outer skin. If I had not replaced my mortal flesh entirely with the flesh of a god, I would have become a walking corpse in an instant." The chief's eyes turned toward the mural. He spoke of his lifelong obsession. "The Pale Goddess has gone mad and she intends to commit suicide. If she dies, the church will fall to the resentment of the kingdom. I must save this church," the master whispered. He reminded Sylvie of their discovery 5 years ago, a piece of living god flesh found in an ancient relic. Since that day, they had pursued a forbidden path. If a goddess could be born from a mortal, then a mortal could replace a goddess. "Are you a demigod now?" Sylvie asked softly. "Not yet," the chief replied, staring at his young, smooth hands. "It is only the skin. But I will not stop until the transformation is complete." The master's plan was pure madness, a desperate gamble to replace the fading, insane Pale Goddess with his own flesh. There was no time to delay. The divine skin he had donned was already consuming him, assimilating his very existence. Within 24 hours, the man known as the Pale Seat would vanish forever. Sylvie, the Lord's chosen executioner, walked through the desolate reaches of the Pale Temple. His footsteps echoed against jagged rocks split by centuries of swordplay. He had come to summon the ascetic knights, warriors who renounced all pleasure to hone their blades. At their center stood the Rust Knight, a man nearly naked and covered in a tapestry of scars. "Are you alone?" Sylvie asked. The man's voice was flat. "My father died 6 days ago. If you wish to duel, I am enough." Sylvie laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "I am not here for trifles. The master summons you. Bring every fool who has survived your training, but leave the weak behind." Soon, Sylvie and 6 transformed warriors stood outside the inner sanctum. Inside, the master was committing the ultimate sacrilege, murdering a deity to steal her throne. A scream suddenly tore through the heavy stone doors, a shrill, piercing shriek like needles scraping against glass. It lasted for a day and a night. When silence finally fell, Sylvie rushed inside. He froze. The figure before him was no longer human. White wings sprouted from the master's back, and scarlet patterns writhed across his skin like living parasites. His voice, when he spoke, was a haunting overlap of male and female tones. "I have succeeded. Halfway," the master whispered. "The goddess is gone. She chose to die by my hand." He looked at his shimmering, androgynous form. "But I need more. 2 divine bodies are not enough." Then the master raised a hand, and a violent surge of power exploded within Sylvie. It was an agonizing, ecstatic reshaping of his soul. Scarlet eyes erupted from Sylvie's palms and face. Beside him, the Rust Knight mutated, growing 6 metallic arms and gray, armored skin, others twisted into hulking, horned monstrosities. "This is outrageous," Sylvie choked out, staring at the blinking eyes on his own hand. "This is the power of a demon." The master's dual-toned laughter filled the hall. "Demon? No, this is the power of a newborn deity." He looked upon his distorted court with burning eyes. "You are my angels. And now we shall demonstrate our majesty. We begin by cleansing the capital." Sylvie's lips curled into a jagged smile. The eyes on his hand watched him back. They were ready. No one told the death knell. No one read the obituary. No one held a funeral for him. Yet in every corner of the land, those connected to the gods felt the void at the same moment. Deep within the Pale Temple, in a water dungeon, Saluin opened his eyes. Chained in waist-deep, freezing water, he sat in absolute darkness. But then, a dream, a momentary shiver from the goddess of the sanctuary. The message was crystal clear: the pale goddess has fallen, the land is about to change, and humanity is not ready. Saluin closed his eyes. In the end, it still came to this. In the Silver Empire, chaos erupted within the elven astrology tower. Ancient gears clicked and groaned as apprentices panicked over equipment failure. Then silence, the instrument stabilized. An older astrologer looked into the distance, his voice heavy. "The suppression of magic has disappeared." Meanwhile, in the Dwarf Mountains, the temple of the Forge goddess rang with the sound of hammers. A master craftsman held up a perfect battle axe, laughing with pride, until he stepped outside. Every other smith was cheering, too, holding up the finest weapons ever made. The master's smile faded. If everyone is special, then no one is. He retreated into his shop, muttering, "I want to play one more round." To the south, Finn and his guerrillas stood upon a liberated battlefield. Suddenly, a soldier pointed to the sky. High above the clouds, a massive, terrifying outline drifted, a dragon, many times larger than any seen before. It hovered, a silent, winged omen, before vanishing into the horizon. At the 9th recovery facility, Chesvia froze. Beside her, Evelyn the 6th was busy slacking off until an eerie, manic laughter filled the room. Chesvia turned, her face twisted with ecstasy. "I am whole," she cried. The pale goddess was gone. Only Chesvia remained. She grabbed her coat, desperate to find Benjamin and share her madness. On the road to Falling Light territory, a reinforced carriage carried the shackled Celia. Inside, the evil spirit Anlige smiled, sensing the goddess's demise. She mocked her guard, Aphrodite, with a single, contemptuous look. Frustrated and humiliated, Aphrodite ran to the front of the caravan to find Benjamin. "Barren, wine." "Is there any wine?" he begged, complaining loudly about the spirit's insults. Benjamin simply looked toward the road ahead and smiled. "When we get to Falling Light territory," Benjamin promised, "I will treat you to drinks." Luo Hui received the message, and the long journey finally neared its end. Benjamin reined in his horse as the garrison town flickered into view. Waiting at the gate stood Chesvia, her silver hair dancing in the wind, her piercing red eyes locked onto him from a distance. But as Benjamin dismounted, a blur of motion interrupted the reunion. It was Diona, rushing forward with breathless excitement. "Your Excellency, you've finally arrived." He cried out, only to be immediately drowned out by the sentient weapon on his back. The red rose gun began chattering incessantly, shouting welcomes and rambling about new recipes developed by the Yellow Rose research team. Benjamin chuckled, shaking his head. "I appreciate the concern, but wasn't that research supposed to be for a new sword?" Diona managed to pull Benjamin aside, whispering urgently, "Was the trip to the southern reach smooth?" "Quite smooth," Benjamin reassured him. "Finn and I resolved the biggest problems. We are currently reorganizing the guerrilla forces." Hearing that his two idols had joined forces, Diona jumped for joy, leaving the red rose gun to mutter grumpily in the background. Once the crowds were dismissed, Benjamin sought the quiet of a small, sunlit room with Chesvia. There in the corner sat Princess Celia. She was bound in specially made shackles, her chair modified into a wheelchair, a silent, broken figure. Chesvia looked at the fallen captain with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Is this her, Princess Celia?" Benjamin sighed, recounting the harrowing tale, the battle in Hurricane City, the reunion with Finn, and the mental collapse that left Celia a hollow shell. Chesvia's brow furrowed. "I can't accept this," she said sharply. "She almost killed you. While you were fighting tooth and nail, she was slacking off inside her own mind." "It feels like a betrayal. I owe her a great debt," Benjamin countered softly. "Without her, I would still be a serf. I bear responsibility for what she has become." Chesvia stepped closer, her voice firm. "Don't take on blame that isn't yours, Benjamin. I can treat her bloodline issues just as I did for Elena, but her mind. That is self-escape. She is fragile, like a little girl." Benjamin leaned back, staring at the ceiling with a heavy heart. "Maybe we protected her too well." Chesvia turned toward the window, silhouetted against the golden light. "She doesn't need to reclaim her glory," she mused. "She needs to face what she has done. To face who she really is. For her, the journey is no longer about victory. It is simply the process of moving from negative to zero." Chesvia did not waste a single word. To demonstrate her fire therapy, she raised her palms, and a surge of white flames engulfed Celia's body, inside and out. Chesvia explained that these flames could burn anything, even a person's DNA. "People like Celia and Elena are born with a blood curse," Chesvia said, extinguishing the fire with a sharp clap. "Their ancestors were related to wizards. I have simply cut the phone line. The evil spirits can no longer reach her." Celia slumped into her wheelchair, unconscious but stable. Benjamin checked on her, still wary of complications, but Chesvia merely rolled her eyes at his concern. Outside, Aphrodite poked his head in, ready to take over. With Benjamin's blessing, Aphrodite pushed the wheelchair toward the town center to visit a lively new market, leaving the two of them alone. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Chesvia looked at Benjamin and dropped a bombshell. "The pale goddess is dead." Benjamin froze. "Dead? Aren't you two sides of the same coin, mister?" "Ben, stop overthinking," Chesvia sighed. "She has been mad for centuries. Am I supposed to go mad with her?" She saw his alarm and softened her tone. "Calm down. I have regained my memories, but I am still Chesvia. That will never change." She began the story of the Pale Journey. Hundreds of years ago, the Pale Goddess arrived in this world, just like Benjamin. Back then, humanity was enslaved by wizards, elves, and dwarves. The goddess led a rebellion, but humans were too weak. Then, the unthinkable happened. The wizards dissected their own goddess of magic, splitting her into 9 parts. The resulting vacuum of hatred fell upon the Pale Goddess, turning her into a deity of pure revenge. She crushed the wizard empire, but the cost was her sanity. To save herself, she separated her power, creating the goddess of the spirit garden, and isolated all magic into the dangerous dust crystals we see today. Chesvia stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the sun. She became aware of your arrival, Benjamin. She shaped me from her own past memories and emotions and sent me to you. She turned back to him, her voice steady and clear. The first transmigrator, the pale goddess, is completely dead. Now, only I am left. The silence of the room was shattered by a sudden, jarring sound. Benjamin was clapping. The applause echoed like firecrackers at a funeral, prompting Chesvia to raise an eyebrow in sharp annoyance. "Why are you making it sound like I'm giving a speech?" she drawled. Benjamin leaned back, his eyes tracing the ceiling. "I just heard secrets of the kingdom," he mused. "It doesn't seem like something a commoner should know." Chesvia didn't miss a beat. She bowed with exaggerated, fawning grace, her voice rising into a high-pitched, thin squeak. "Oh dear Baron, please don't say that. You are a nobleman." The way she dragged out the final word was like a feather tickling a raw nerve. Benjamin shivered. "Where did you learn that? It sounds even more affected than mine." His face then turned uncharacteristically serious. "I'm just glad you're all right. I honestly fantasized about whether I'd have to conquer the entire kingdom just to find you." He regretted the weight of the words instantly, but Chesvia's eyes lit up. "Conquer the kingdom? That sounds incredibly exciting." She teased him, asking if he wasn't handsome enough already, and for a moment they shared a private language of jokes, memories that only the two of them could truly understand. Then Benjamin reached behind his back. He produced a crown, completely black, its dust crystal patterns shimmering in the light, the crown of the rising wind. Chesvia took it, her breath catching. "What is this?" "The imperial seal of this country," Benjamin explained. "A last gift from a friend. My mind blade couldn't wake it, but it's more than just a stone." Chesvia held it to the sun. "This is wizard work, pseudo-magic technology. If you trust me, let me examine it. Just don't break it," Benjamin warned softly. "The crown isn't important, the memory of my friend is." The moment was broken by a frantic knocking. Evelyn strode in, her face pale with urgency. "Your Excellency, the Deadborn of Stonecliff are retreating to the capital. The Pale Church of the East has declared a holy war to purify the city." Benjamin froze. Why now? Why the sudden change of heart? "Whatever their game is," he declared, "we must move, dispatch the allied forces. We support Stonecliff and hold back the Deadborn. This is our chance to end it." 1,000 miles away, Alkea sat in his council chamber, reading the same reports. He knew this was a dog-eat-dog opportunity he couldn't ignore. He ordered his forces to march, even if it meant swallowing his pride to work with his estranged father-in-law. Now the pieces are moving. From the west, the allied forces; from the east, the Holy Crusade; and from the plains, the silent, unfocused Deadborn. All paths lead to the capital, where the fate of the kingdom will finally be decided. The order was issued, and the Liuhui territory garrison erupted into a frenzy of motion. Soldiers scrambled from tents, packing gear, while officers barked counts and assigned tasks. Amidst the chaos, Diona moved like a shadow from one end of the camp to the other, checking supply wagons and maps with a meticulous eye. On his back, the sentient weapon, the red roses, cried out with a restless, frantic hunger for the coming slaughter. Benjamin watched the mobilization, his brow furrowed with worry. He turned to Chesvia, questioning if leaving Sunset territory so exposed was a mistake. Chesvia, tilting her head as she channeled the memories of the pale goddess, offered a chilling reassurance. She pulled a glass bottle from her bodice. Inside, a clump of hair wriggled like a trapped animal. "Their target is the remains of the goddess," she whispered, shaking the bottle until the hair bristled. Once the relic was moved, the enemy would have no reason to stay. The only soul displeased was Aphrodite. He had just returned from the market, pushing Celia in a wheelchair and clutching 2 jars of homemade wine. "I was hoping to drink these with you tonight," he grumbled, sounding surprisingly aggrieved. Benjamin chuckled, smoothly convincing him that they would simply share the spirits with friends from the Lingyuan church once they reached the front lines. Chesvia, however, leaned in with a quiet warning: "Drink less. Homemade spirits these days can turn a man blind." As the march began, Aphrodite's greed resurfaced. He cornered Chesvia, begging for a taste of the holy blood that had turned the tide of past wars. Chesvia merely rolled her eyes. "It is in limited supply," she snapped. "Get in line." The journey to Stone Cliff began. Diona led on horseback while the others cramped into a creaking carriage. Benjamin revealed their route. They would take a transport railcar from Ironcast Ridge to save time. Meanwhile, at the stone cliff front, a delicate silence had fallen. The Deadborn had vanished overnight, leaving behind only piles of rotting limbs. While some argued for a pursuit, the commander, Ella, was distracted by a crumpled letter. Benjamin was arriving in 3 days. "Housekeeper," she roared. Clement appeared instantly, his pristine suit a sharp contrast to the dusty camp. Ella demanded a full aristocratic banquet to welcome the guests. It was an impossible task to host a noble feast in a war zone without destroying the morale of the starving soldiers, but Clement simply bowed. "Understood, miss, it will be ready." The specialty of Liu bowling is not radishes but lettuce. This fact gave Benjamin a subtle sense of absurdity the moment he stepped into the territory. Before he could even ponder the irony, he was swamped by enthusiastic commune members. Bundle after bundle of fresh greens were thrust into his arms, until the lettuce was piled up to his chin, completely obscuring his view. Behind him, Chesvia followed, clutching her own leafy burden like someone forcibly handed a litter of kittens. They moved toward the platform where a railcar from Ironcastling waited, emitting a low, labored sigh of steam. Inside the carriage, Aphrodite sat as rigid as a piece of wood. He watched the tracks with a desperate intensity, his mind racing with a single, panicked thought: will this thing really not explode? Seeing Benjamin's furrowed brow, Aphrodite assumed the Baron shared his terror. He leaned in, trying to sound like a seasoned traveler. "Don't be nervous, Baron. It's normal to feel." "What did you say?" Benjamin interrupted, his voice heavy. "I was thinking about something that was giving me a headache." The shared moment of misery vanished. Benjamin wasn't afraid of the machine, he was dreading the arrival at Stonecliff territory. "Calvin's coffin is in the other carriage," Benjamin admitted quietly. "I have to tell his people that he's dead. I can't stand that kind of atmosphere." As the railcar rattled on, Aphrodite's nerves turned into physical sickness. By the time they reached the station, he was dizzy and pale, having narrowly avoided vomiting on the Baron. Benjamin stepped off first, looking up in awe. The castle of Stonecliff Ridge rose from the steep cliffs like an ancient creature carved from gray-white stone. Arrow towers lined the walls, and the griffin emblem of the kingdom's fortress fluttered high above. In the main hall, they were met by the vice-commander of the Griffin Knights, a man with shoulders as broad as a wall and a fierce scar across his face. His eyes flickered to the coffin for only a second before he looked away. "I will repay this kindness," the commander rasped, his Adam's apple bobbing as he fought his grief. "We prepared for the worst. Recovering the body is an unexpected blessing." He turned his back to hide his face. "The transport to the front lines is ready. Remember, Shieling will always be your friend." Soon, they were back on the move in a rudimentary cargo car swaying over rough tracks. Benjamin watched the great stone spire of the castle recede into the distance, one heavy burden finally laid to rest, while the unknown of the front lines waited ahead. The camps at the front were quite different on this day. Clement stood in the center of the grounds, his gaze sweeping over a long list of supplies. His expression remained calm, yet his eyebrows were lowered by a single millimeter. This was his silent way of admitting that the matter was, indeed, a bit tricky. The tricky part was not the men of Ironcast Ridge. The soldiers there were already used to the whims of their lady Ella. When Clement approached them, a leading sergeant simply waved him off with a swig of wine. I know," the man laughed. "The miss is putting on a show again. Just tell us what you need. She never forgets us when she is treating." Soon, the Ironcastlings were hard at work, hammering surplus timber into long tables and crafting makeshift stools from barrel planks. The real challenge lay with the Holy War armies. They were a fractured collection of sects with no unified leader. Clement had to persuade them. One by one, he first approached Bishop Gallon of the Linguan Church. Clement did not mention a party, instead he spoke of sacrifice. He argued that the soldiers, who had just endured a fierce battle against the Deadborn, deserved a reward before the next wave of darkness arrived. "I have no objection," Gallon replied calmly. "The soldiers do need this." With the bishop's blessing, the rest of the sects softened. The bards of the Earth Mother Church offered music in exchange for wine, while the Celebration Church began setting up the tables with practiced joy. Even the grim Bishop Urruti from the cemetery offered his Deathbringers to stand guard, patting his giant, muscular arms. Inside her tent, Ella tried on a long, crimson dress. Clement had shortened the hem so it would not drag through the camp's mud, yet it still billowed like a swaying flower as she twirled. When she finally stepped outside, the camp had been transformed. Long tables lined the open space, braziers roared with orange flame, and the air was thick with the sound of tuning instruments and laughter. A soldier approached her, bowing awkwardly to thank her for the feast. Ella raised her chin, her voice sharp. "I did not invite you," she stated. Then, looking out at the joyful crowd, she softened, just a fraction. "However, it is not in the dignity of a nobleman to drive away guests. Just do not cause trouble." As the celebration peaked, a transport railcar screeched to a halt at the nearby station. Benjamin jumped down into the dark night, looking toward the distant, orange glow of the camp. "What is going on?" his companion Chesvia asked in surprise. "Is it a war or a festival?" Benjamin laughed, his eyes bright. "If I am not mistaken, there is a banquet waiting for us." The camp was a symphony of rough edges and savory aromas. A long table, cobbled together from mismatched planks and leveled with scraps of wood, groaned under the weight of roasted meats and herb-infused stews. The air hung heavy with the scent of burning grease, the sharp tang of ale, and the rhythmic pop of the crackling campfire. As Benjamin led his group into the light, a flash of crimson darted from the tents. It was Ella. Her skirt billowed as she skidded to a halt, hands planted firmly on her hips. "You're late," she accused, her wide eyes fixed on Benjamin. Benjamin sighed. "I can't control the speed of the track car, Ella." "Excuses," she declared, poking him squarely in the chest. "As punishment, you are forbidden from leaving until this party is over." Clement appeared like a ghost at Benjamin's side, handing him a glass of wine. "A cruel punishment indeed," Benjamin joked. Behind him, his companions joined in. Aphrodite drained his glass in one greedy gulp, while Diona held hers with a stiff, cautious hesitation. Ella's gaze soon shifted to Chesvia. "It has been a long time," Chesvia said, her bow walking the fine line between respect and indifference. Ella raised her chin. "A word of advice, do not wander. This is a battlefield, not a public hall." Chesvia took a slow sip of her wine, masking the burn of the cheap alcohol that scorched her throat. To her, there was no aroma, only the stinging heat of the liquid. Ella then turned her attention to Aphrodite, who was already reaching for a second glass. He stepped forward with a solemn air, hand over his heart. "I am the Baron's close friend, the Bishop of—" "Oh," Ella interrupted, beaming at Benjamin. "A personal servant, how wonderful. You're finally developing an aristocratic air." Aphrodite's face fell. "I am a friend," Benjamin corrected with a sigh. "The titles don't matter." Suddenly, Chesvia caught the scent of the communal stew pot. Disgusted by the haphazard ingredients, she slammed her glass down. "I am going to fetch the lettuce from the truck," she announced. "I will show you all what a real meal looks like." Diona immediately followed to ensure her safety, while Aphrodite vanished into the crowd toward the wine barrels. Finally, the chaos settled. Benjamin and Ella sat together on a wooden crate, the firelight casting giant shadows against the tents. Ella began to count her victories on her fingers, recounting how she repelled the dead ones and held the line alone. "I have broken free from the Pascal family shackles," she boasted, her smile growing wider with every word. Benjamin watched her, offering genuine praise. He remembered the old Ella, the one who caused trouble just to be noticed. But looking at her now, he realized she no longer needed to prove herself through schemes. She had finally become the leader she always pretended to be. Without Ella's strength, Benjamin knew the stone cliff front would have already crumbled, leaving the royal territory to be swallowed by a tidal wave of deadborn. He would have been trapped, attacked from both sides, with no hope of holding Frost Town, let alone recapturing the capital. "Thank goodness you are all right," Benjamin whispered. Ella's eyes flashed with her usual fire. "Hey, you do not actually think a little danger could hurt Lady Ella, do you?" Her voice quickened as if she were afraid to stop. "The most important thing is to engrave my invincible spirit into your heart." Benjamin dropped his playful mask. "I am not joking, I was worried, truly. I know how powerful you are, but I am just happy to see you safe and energetic, really." Ella's breath hitched. She pointed a trembling finger at him. You handyman, I do not need your concern. I think you had better, but she couldn't finish. Her body seemed to move with a will of its own, leaning slowly, until her cheek rested softly on his shoulder. I am perfectly fine, she muttered. In that moment, she remembered her recurring dream. A world where the war was over, the dead ones were gone, and Benjamin stayed, not as a commander, but as her companion. In the dream, they rode toward an unknown horizon to see all the wonders of the world, together. I won't disappear, she muffled against his coat. There are still so many things I haven't seen. Nearby, the victory banquet roared with life. Soldiers sang, argued, and slammed mugs of ale. Amidst the chaos, Aphrodite, ever poised and elegant, weaved through the crowd. He found the celibate followers gathered around a table where Arudi was busy winning arm-wrestling matches with decisive strength. Aphrodite approached Galon, who sat on a crate with a book in his lap. I have come to witness the Baron's journey, Aphrodite explained. To him, witnessing was not being a bystander, it was jumping into the river and being swept away by the same current. Call Arudi, Galon said, straightening his robes. Let us go see this Benjamin Blackwood. The three men crossed the camp, Aphrodite leading the way with a hurried pace. But as they rounded the corner, they saw them, Ella leaning peacefully on Benjamin's shoulder. Baron, Aphrodite called out, his voice jumping a half-octave. Ella recoiled as if burned, springing away so fast her skirt snapped in the air. She stood rigid, chin high, trying to reclaim her arrogance. Galon sighed. I think we came at the wrong time. On the contrary, Aphrodite replied, taking a seat with a smirk, we have come at just the right time. The formal atmosphere had veered into something completely unbelievable. Ella sat beside Benjamin, muttering about uninvited and ill-mannered guests from the Spirit Garden Church. Her fingers tapped restlessly on her knees, her eyes darting glares toward Aphrodite. Galon watched her with a sense of bewilderment. He remembered Ella from the front lines as a lady who valued aristocratic honor above life itself, not this sulking girl muttering to herself. Then there was Aphrodite. The man Galon once knew as elegant and poised was now an eccentric fellow, squeezing into tight spaces and talking incoherently. Meanwhile, Benjamin chatted warmly with Galon and Aldi. He lacked the crude curses of a mercenary, yet avoided the hollow pleasantries of a noble. Within minutes, Aldi and Benjamin were like sworn brothers, bonded by their shared history on the battlefield. Finding a moment alone with Galon, Benjamin leaned in. Brother Galon, do you have a brother named Sokka? Galon froze. You know him, we are quite familiar, Benjamin replied with a straight face. I make long-distance calls to him whenever I have time. Galon had no idea what a long-distance call was, but Benjamin's serious tone suggested it was no joke. Sokka is my twin, Galon explained softly. Few know he is trapped in the capital. He is playing a battle royale game there, Benjamin said, raising a glass. It is dangerous, but I will get him out, then you two can have a proper drink. Galon shook his head. My relationship with my brother is not good. We haven't spoken in years. Suddenly, Aphrodite chimed in from behind them. He is still holding a grudge because Sokka stole the position of bishop. Aphrodite, Galon snapped, since when did you become so eloquent? When Benjamin eventually returned to his seat, Aphrodite had vanished. Ella remained on her box, her annoyance replaced by a look of confused longing. Where is Aphrodite? Benjamin asked. Who knows, Ella scoffed, probably fell into a pit. But then Aphrodite emerged from the crowd, pushing a wheelchair. Inside sat Celia, a beautiful woman clutching two ceramic jars with a helpless expression. Ella jumped up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. What are you doing to Celia? She shrieked, delivering a sharp kick to Aphrodite's shin. Aphrodite stumbled but didn't lose his smile. It's a celebration, he said innocently. Let everyone participate. He took the jars, raised his hand high, and with a sharp palm strike shattered the seals. Try this, he shouted, pouring a strange, green liquid. A merchant told me it's been aging for 10 years. Benjamin stared at the green wine. Is this drinkable? He took a sip. It tasted of copper rust. Suddenly, a rich aroma cut through the air, the scent of hot oil, garlic, and charred vegetables. Chesvia appeared carrying a massive bowl of stir-fried lettuce and meat. Why only drink? She asked. Have some food. Benjamin took a bite. The explosion of salt and garlic was divine. "This is better than any stew," he mumbled. As the crowd pressed in, drawn by the smell, Chesvia called out to Diona and a sleepy Evelyn to bring more. "When did you make this?" Evelyn asked, rubbing her eyes. "Just now," Chesvia replied. "I stir-fried it with yellow rose." Benjamin's spoon stopped. He looked at the sword at Diona's waist. A white cloth was tied to the blade like an apron. The sword, the legendary yellow rose, had been used as a cooking utensil. The blade swayed in the firelight, looking strangely proud. Suddenly, a wine glass slammed against Benjamin's lips. It was Ella. "Drink," she challenged, her voice thick with intoxication. "If I don't drink you under the table, I'll change my name." "You're drunk," Benjamin sighed. "I am not," she yelled. The night dissolved into a blur of music and dancing. Bards plucked cheerful melodies, and Aphrodite led the way with wild, waving arms. Even the sword seemed to join in. Red Rose grumbled from Diona's back. "Can't you move?" "Are your legs fake?" Ella drifted back to Benjamin, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "Are you happy?" she whispered through the noise. Benjamin, dazed and overwhelmed, blurted out, "Holding a banquet at the front is so wasteful." Ella's face fell into a look of pure grievance. "You are so clueless about romance." Benjamin caught himself. He leaned close to her ear, his voice softening. "Maybe, but thank you for everything you've done for me." As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Benjamin stood alone upon a high, rocky ridge, overlooking the quiet camp. The morning light stretched behind him, casting a long, thin shadow toward the distant capital. The crunch of gravel announced a visitor. Chesvia walked up beside him, her voice light. "What are you doing here all by yourself, admiring the scenery?" Benjamin did not turn around. "Calming my mind," he replied softly. "I need to be in top condition for the next battle." The land before them was eerily empty. No army of the Deadborn, no banners of the Crusaders, not even a single bird. Only a gray horizon veiled in a thin, ghostly mist. "It looks really good," Chesvia remarked. "What would you like for breakfast?" "I was just thinking of coming to see you," Benjamin said, his tone suddenly shifting. "I need you to take Celia and retreat to Stone Cliff Castle, immediately." "Before the battle begins," Chesvia's expression soured. "What, do you think I can't handle myself? I'll have you know, if we really fought, even Aphrodite wouldn't be a match for me." "It is precisely because I believe in your strength that you must go," Benjamin insisted. He turned to face her, his eyes grave. "You possess the blood and hair of the goddess of magic. Anrise craves that power. We cannot brazenly walk it into their lair. Do you understand?" Chesvia realized there was no room for negotiation. "You're considering this from the premise that you will fail." Benjamin's gaze lingered on her face. "Chesvia, forgive me for being such a coward." Meanwhile, on the plains outside the capital, an army of 20,000 men marched, a column stretching from one end of the horizon to the other. At the head of the procession rode Sylvie, his 6 scarlet eyes darting independently, multitasking with a terrifying, absent-minded focus. Behind him marched the 6 ascetic knights, monstrosities that were no longer human. The Rust Knight led the way, his 6 arms swaying, each clutching a sword coated in dark red rust. Beside him, a giant with devilish horns carried a massive banner, his every step leaving a deep crater in the earth. A centaur-like knight trotted alongside, gripping a longbow made from his own living tissue. At the edges, a wolf-headed knight sniffed the air with dagger-long claws, while a knight in white bone armor and another shrouded in black mist brought up the rear. Undead blocking the way, the centaur knight spoke, his ears twitching. "About 1,300, Sylvie didn't even blink. Run it over." The army did not slow down. The Rust Knight plunged into the horde like a meat grinder, his 6 blades beheading and severing limbs in a rehearsed dance of slaughter. The giant swept the flagpole, shattering bodies like glass, while the centaur's arrows struck with the force of a ballista. The undead were not a hurdle, they were paper in a shredder. Sylvie watched the carnage with cold indifference. "Compared to them," he whispered, "I am still too human." Far behind this trail of blood, Walter and Percival led their own troops, following the path of destruction. Walter pointed to a pile of unrecognizable remains, a scout torn apart by a single, massive force. "Your pale church," Walter began, his voice trembling with dread. Have you been harboring demons all along? Percival's face twitched violently. He couldn't look away from the gore. Don't ask, he pleaded. I'm begging you, don't ask. The morning sun bleeds over the capital, illuminating city walls that stand like a stubborn tombstone, refusing to fall. Built centuries ago from the plundered wealth of a fallen empire, these stones have survived both time and the rot of the Deathborn. Sylvie sits astride his horse, his 6 eyes moving independently, flickering from the crumbling battlements to the aimless dead wandering above. One eye tracks a lone eagle circling the horizon, while his main focus pierces deep into the city, toward the ravaged palace where the goddess's remains lie waiting. Sylvie smiles, recalling his master's cryptic orders. Crush everything, he tells himself, impale the evil gods upon wooden stakes. He knows his master speaks only in riddles, but it doesn't matter. Behind him stand 20,000 men who crave a reason to erase this city from the map. Sylvie glances at the 6 figures beside him. Horned Knight, open the city gates. The Horned Knight, the largest of the penitent 6, carries a massive banner that functions more like a battering ram. In a blur of black shadow, he vanishes, then crashes into the gate. The heavy wood shatters like paper, the war horns sound. 10,000 pale-skinned crusaders surge forward like a tidal wave, pouring into the streets with fervent, fearless eyes. They slice through the frail undead like blades through ripe fruit. But then, the tide meets a wall. Out of the shadows emerges a complete order of dead knights, legendary warriors of history, mounted on steeds of black crystal. They charge in perfect, silent formation. Their spears pierce through priest and soldier alike, trampling the living into a bloody pulp. From the sky, 2-legged dragons swoop down to snatch men into the clouds, while beneath the cobblestones, giant reptiles the size of carriages snap soldiers in two with massive pincers. Most terrifying of all are the limb-jointed chimeras, monstrous mountains of stitched flesh and hundreds of crawling arms that rampage through the ranks. The Crusaders advance slows, but they do not retreat. They throw their bodies into the meat grinder, ramming the enemy head-on. Sylvie watches the slaughter with cold calculation. Conserve your strength, he murmurs to his elite knights. These enemies are not worth your effort. Let the soldiers open a bloody path for us. The Rust Knight, his 6 swords dripping with gore, glares at him. You are sending them to their deaths. Sylvie's smile never wavers. All 6 of his eyes fix upon the knight with a suffocating intensity. So what? I am the commander of this army, not you. Without a word, the knights turn back to the battlefield, silent statues waiting for the next command, as the city screams. Outside the capital, on the high ground of the front line, Benjamin stands amidst the rising heat of war. Behind him, the allied forces of Frosttown and Ella's troops are a sea of steel and tension. Steam-powered vehicles rumble, their boilers hissing as thick, white clouds billow from the exhaust pipes. Every soldier is armed with the latest technology, dust crystal explosives and repeating crossbows, prepared at any cost to kill Anrise and retrieve the goddess's remains. Benjamin stares at the distant, shrouded city. He knows the Pale Church has already staged a usurpation of their goddess, and he will not allow such sinister villains to claim her power. Beside him, Ella's face flickers between excitement and a deep, gnawing fear. She whispers, "It's finally coming to an end." "It's not over yet," Benjamin replies coldly. "It's just the beginning." He reaches into his coat, his fingers brushing a glass tube tucked against his chest. It is the holy blood of Chesvia, a single dose meant not for victory, but for survival. Suddenly, an eagle circles through the thick smoke above. It swoops down like an arrow, its body crackling and shifting midair, bones reforming, feathers becoming skin, until Ferdinand, the Earth Mother's consort, lands silently in the dust. He brings urgent news. The Pale Church has breached the walls and the Northern Wolf Riders have arrived. Ella's voice turns fierce. Why now? Did they time this perfectly? Don't rush, Benjamin says calmly. They have their path and we have ours. Just because the paths intersect does mean we have to hold hands. Meanwhile, deep within the city's ruins, Sokka crouches inside a collapsing clock tower. Below him, the streets are a nightmare. A massive chimera sewn together from dozens of corpses crawls through the rubble. It is swarmed by pale crusaders who fight with a terrifying, mindless frenzy. They use their teeth when their swords break. They crawl forward even when their bellies are ripped open. Benjamin's voice echoes in Sokka's mind. What is the situation? It has never been this chaotic, Sokka whispers, watching a soldier charge with a blade held in his teeth. They have no concept of death. They are monsters. Be careful, Benjamin warns. Don't neglect the mission. Sokka narrows his eyes, focusing on the gray mist swirling around the palace. His task is simple yet heavy. Watch the goddess's remains and wait for the signal to strike. Benjamin stood suspended between two worlds. Through the eyes of his connection, Sokka, he saw the royal capital choking on smoke and fire. But before his own eyes, he saw Ella, so close he could spot a single speck of ash on her nose. The pale church is advancing toward the palace, Benjamin reported, his voice tight. They are unstoppable, but they are our distraction. He turned to the ranks of warriors behind him, his hand pointing toward the jagged horizon. While they draw the main force of the Deadborn, we march straight in and take the palace. The air suddenly shattered. Diona and a squad of engineers rushed the city wall, not the gate, but the stone itself. On Diona's back, the red rose swayed as he hissed for silence. They set the high-powered dust crystal explosives and retreated. Then, boom, the wall bulged outward like it had been kicked by a giant, collapsing in a deafening roar of debris and gray mist. Through the gap, the assault began. 6 colossal, steam-powered war chariots roared to life, their iron wheels crushing rubble as they surged into the ruins. Monsters awaited them, limb-splitting chimeras and mountains of stitched flesh, but the chariots were relentless. Steam-powered crossbows and cannons thundered, shredding the undead into black liquid and twitching fragments. Galon and Arity fought alongside the steel behemoths. Galon's fist, glowing with golden light, punched through the head of a swooping wyvern with a sickening crack. These weapons, Arity shouted over the din, are terrifying. We are lucky they are allies. On the lead chariot, Ella gripped the control levers while Benjamin manned the heavy dust crystal ballista. Beside them, Aphrodite fired a repeating crossbow into the air, shouting with manic excitement. Benjamin's temples throbbed. The mental strain of maintaining his connection to Sokka was becoming a physical weight. He pulled the trigger and the ballista roared, blowing a massive chimera into two. Good, Aphrodite cheered, but Benjamin couldn't celebrate. His mind was still with Sokka, watching the pale church from afar. Suddenly, Sokka's voice echoed in his skull, sharp with urgency. Barren, one of the ascetic knights, has jumped onto the tower. They aren't looking at the palace anymore. A cold chill ran down Benjamin's spine as the message finished. They are aiming directly at you. Benjamin didn't have time to warn the others. Sokka's voice still echoed in his mind as his gaze swept past the ruins, past the holy warriors and the fighting dead, landing finally on the tallest tower to his left. It was an old clock tower standing solitary amidst the rubble. At the very top, a figure stood. The distance was immense, far too great for any ordinary man to see, but Benjamin's psychic blade felt the lock-on instantly. An invisible line of intent was stretching across the battlefield, landing precisely on his chest. Then, he saw it, a ripple tore through the air. The arrow was moving faster than sound itself, a blur of lethal energy cutting through smoke and dust. It didn't arc, it traveled in a perfectly straight, terrifying line. Benjamin reacted with brutal instinct. He threw up a psychic wall of repulsion, an invisible barrier of compressed air. When the arrow struck, the entire wall trembled. The projectile pierced one layer, then two, then three. Its trajectory shifted just enough to graze the chariot's roof, tearing through armor plating before slamming into the earth. The explosion was deafening. A massive crater erupted, throwing soldiers through the air like ragdolls. Aphrodite's face went pale. Who, he stammered, who ambushed us? The opponent's aim is excellent, Benjamin replied, his temples throbbing from the strain. Watch out, the enemy is on the tower. Aphrodite summoned a shield of thorns and Ella's psychic blades began to hum, but a red afterimage already streaked across the sky. Diona had acted first. Her red spear collided with a second arrow in midair, the impact blooming into a violent explosion. My lord, Diona growled, her fury ignited. Please allow me to fight for you. Before Benjamin could answer, a third arrow struck the rear chariot. The explosion shattered the vehicle's wheel, leaving it tilted like a lame ox. Benjamin slammed his fist against the metal. The pale church is determined to oppose us. He looked to the sky. Ferdinand, a massive eagle soared overhead. Diona leaped, grabbing the creature's claw as they surged toward the tower. High above, the crescent moon knight watched them approach. He was no longer entirely human. His lower body was that of a horse, his skin matted with thick hair, his eyes a pupilless silver. He raised a longbow crafted from his own living tissue, knocked a fresh arrow, and aimed. He had no grand ambitions. He lived only to hone his skill and to kill the strong. Sylvie stood amidst the carnage of the battlefield, his gaze fixed upon the royal palace. Within those walls lay the remains of the goddess, the final key to the pale church's ascension. To Sylvie, this was not about old, suicidal gods. It was about birthing a new deity that belonged solely to them. Behind him, the wolf-headed knight emerged, his amber eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. They discovered the waning moon, the knight growled, his canine teeth protruding. "Do you need my help?" "There is absolutely no need for that," Sylvie replied coldly. Despite the protests of the wolf-headed knight and the six-armed rust knight, Sylvie remained firm. He would not waste his strength on petty duels. "What we need to worry about most," Sylvie stated, "is Blackwood and his gang. They possess 2 sets of the goddess's remains. We must not allow them to reach the palace first." With a sharp command, Sylvie unleashed his hunters. The wolf-headed knight lunged forward on all fours like a bolt of black lightning. Following him were the Horn Knight, whose heavy steps made the earth tremble, the skeletal bone-armored knight, and the Black Mist Knight, who drifted like a lethal vapor. Only the Rust Knight remained behind, uninterested in anything but the death of the evil god. From the ruins, Bishop Sokka watched in silence as the 4 demonic knights charged toward Benjamin Blackwood's position. High atop a chariot, Benjamin gripped the trigger of his ballista. His mind blade was active, sensing every life and every wisp of smoke within 400 meters. The 4 knights appeared in his consciousness like burning flames. "Left front, 400 meters, Benjamin's voice boomed. "Everyone, aim." The soldiers of Frosttown reacted with mechanical precision. As the 4 knights erupted from the ruins, they were met with a devastating barrage. A dust crystal bolt struck the Horn Knight, tearing his massive arm clean off in a spray of blood and bone. The wolf-headed knight and bone-armored knight were peppered with shrapnel, while the Black Mist Knight simply drifted through the fire. "They knew we were coming," the wolf-headed knight hissed through clenched teeth. As the knights closed the distance, Aphrodite leaped from a chariot, grabbing the wolf-headed knight's claws mid-stride. He was dragged across the gravel, his nails digging deep into the beast's fur. "Aphrodite," Benjamin shouted over the roar of battle. "Can you handle him?" Aphrodite felt the knight's overwhelming strength, but his pride roared louder. "Easy." He screamed, digging his heels into the dirt. "That's it. Is that all you've got?" Aphrodite lunged forward, wrapping his arms around the massive, wolf-headed knight's forelimbs. It was a desperate, absurd sight, a man of normal build clinging to a beast larger than a horse. Veins bulged in Aphrodite's neck as his feet dug deep furrows into the earth, dragged backward by the creature's raw power. Beneath them, the ground trembled as thick, thorny vines burst from the rubble. They coiled around the knight's hind legs, barbs sinking deep into flesh. Aphrodite felt a surge of hope. If he could just hold on, the thorns would climb higher, strangling the life out of this monster. But then he looked up. The knight's jaw unhinged with a sickening crack, opening far wider than any human anatomy should allow. From deep within its chest, not its throat, an explosion of sound erupted. A wolf's howl, but it was more like an invisible awl stabbing directly into Aphrodite's brain. The shockwave was devastating. Nearby, Benjamin's vision blurred and soldiers collapsed, clutching their bleeding ears. Aphrodite took the full brunt of it. His eyes went hollow, blood oozed from his earlobes. His hearing failed instantly and his body went limp. The knight showed no mercy. A massive claw tore through the air, shattering Aphrodite's thorn armor and sending him crashing through a stone wall. Before he could land, a second strike slammed him through another building. He was being toyed with like prey. Benjamin watched in horror, but he was trapped. A lethal black mist had descended upon his chariot, reducing soldiers to corpses in seconds. The mist coalesced into a humanoid shape, reaching for him. Ella lunged with her sword, but the blade passed through the vapor as if it were nothing. The mist coiled around her arm, dragging her into a dark void filled with spectral weapons. At the brink of death, Ella's psychic blades ignited. The sheer heat melted the incoming weapons into glowing, liquid iron. She forged the molten metal into a blade and severed the mist hand gripping her. "I can't reach him," she screamed. Benjamin pulled her back, his brow furrowed. It is a physical entity, he realized, just too small to hit. He focused his mind, using his Nen blade to compress the very air around the mist. He squeezed the particles together, tighter and tighter, until the knight was trapped in a single point of space. Ella now, she hurled a sphere of molten iron. It exploded over the compressed mist, encasing it in a glowing red shell. The metal cooled instantly into a seamless, silver-gray orb. "Enjoy your confinement," Ella panted, but the victory was short-lived. Across the street, houses continued to collapse. The wolf-headed knight stood over the battered, bloodied Aphrodite, pinning him under a massive paw. The beast looked toward Benjamin and snorted with disdain. "Incompetent," it muttered, referring to the fallen mist. As the knight prepared to deliver the killing blow, it suddenly stiffened. The blood Aphrodite had spilled wasn't a sign of defeat, it was a trap. The droplets on the knight's fur came alive, sprouting into scarlet thorns that burrowed into its flesh and entangled its bones. The knight let out a low growl of pain, then opened its maw for one final, reckless howl. The sound wave hit like a tsunami, shattering the blood thorns into dust and sending the entire street into a whirlwind of destruction. On the opposite side of the blood-soaked battlefield, Bishop Arity of the Spirit Garden faced the Knight of the Horn in a duel of impossible proportions. Arity was a man of great strength, yet he looked like a mere child before the giant. The two-horned knight stood twice his height, shoulders as broad as a door, with a single remaining arm thicker than a man's thigh. Arity did not flinch. He rushed forward, seizing the devilish horns with both hands. Muscles bulged, veins popped on his forehead, and with a guttural roar he heaved the giant into the air. The horned knight crashed into the earth, leaving a massive crater. Soldiers seized the moment, unleashing a volley of crossbow bolts, but the projectiles simply shattered against the giant's skin as if hitting solid iron. The Knight of the Horn rose. His left arm was a gruesome ruin torn away at the shoulder by a ballista, leaving a mess of bone and mangled flesh. As his strength drained and his vision blurred, a primal rage took hold. It was the instinct of a cornered beast. His body began to warp, bones shifted, and two enormous, bat-like wings burst from his back. His jaw protruded, his teeth sharpened, and he transformed into a complete devil. With a speed that defied his size, the devil struck. Arity didn't even see the punch. He was sent flying 20 meters, tumbling through the rubble. Before he could stand, a new horror appeared, a skeletal knight atop a ghostly warhorse, its hooves burning with blue will-o'-the-wisps. The skeletal spear pierced Arity's arm, tossing him aside like a ragdoll. The bone-armored knight rampaged through the ranks. Galan, seeing an opening, leaped behind the rider and delivered a golden light punch powerful enough to shatter city walls. But the impact only hummed, the bone armor was harder than steel. Chaos erupted as the Horned Knight overturned a steam-powered chariot. Desperate, an archer fired a dust crystal ballista. The explosion engulfed the giant, but he shielded himself with his wings, which were shredded into tattered rags. Enraged, the devil charged the chariot. A human wall of infantry stood in his way. Though their shields shattered and men were tossed aside, they held their ground. 20 soldiers used their own flesh to halt the demon's charge. The archer fired again, blinding the giant's left eye. The Horned Knight went mad, severing a soldier in two with his teeth in a horrific display of savagery. "A demon," someone whispered in terror. But the soldiers did not flee. They swarmed the giant, thrusting spears and swords into his existing wounds, the raw, unprotected meat of his severed shoulder. "Get out of the way!" Soldiers with flamethrowers bathed the giant's face in scorching fire. Blinded and reeling, the Horned Knight could only flail. The archer on the chariot reloaded, took a steady breath, and pulled the trigger. The dust crystal ballista struck the giant's chest dead center. The explosion ripped him open, exposing throbbing organs. Every soldier nearby lunged, driving steel into the vulnerable gap. The Knight of the Horn sank to his knees. His strength faded, his mind went dark, and the great devil finally lowered his head. Gallon stood amidst the carnage, his heart surging as he watched his soldiers fight demons with nothing but their own flesh and blood. "You are all admirable," he whispered. "Then what reason do I have to hold back?" A blinding golden light erupted not from his skin but from his very marrow and blood. It surged into a golden river, carrying Gallon's fist directly into the bone-armored knight's chest. The impact was cataclysmic. The knight was hurled through walls and rubble, his legendary armor spiderwebbing with cracks. Gallon leaped from his horse, raining down blows that sounded like boulders crashing together. Suddenly, a blood-soaked figure rejoined the fray. It was Aldi. Despite a broken spear embedded in his arm, he charged like a wounded bull, tackling the bone knight. "I was protected by someone who needed protection," he roared, pinning the monster and shattering his own knuckles against the bone plating. Blood and tears mingled as Aldi struck again and again, until the knight fought back. Vicious bone spurs erupted from the demon's body, skewering Aldi through his shoulders, side, and thighs. Gallon rushed forward, ripping his friend from the spikes and ordering his men to drag the dying hero to safety. Gallon turned back to the rising bone knight, his fists glowing with a final, lethal intent. "Even if it costs me my life, you will not leave here alive." Nearby, the wolf-headed knight retreated behind a wall, gasping for air. His opponent, Aphrodite, lay broken in the rubble, ears bleeding and vision blurred. Benjamin rushed to his side, but Aphrodite pushed him away, his voice a hoarse rasp. "I'm almost done warming up, now it's time to get serious." Aphrodite charged with impossible speed. The wolf-headed knight reached out to crush him, but as his claws closed, he realized his mistake. Blood-red thorns, thin as hair but stronger than steel, sprouted from Aphrodite's skin, burrowing deep into the demon's flesh and bone. As the wolf-headed knight prepared a lethal howl, Benjamin telekinetically jammed a sword into its open jaws. Ella followed instantly, melting the metal into a scalding liquid that sealed the demon's throat. Trapped and burning, the wolf-headed knight collapsed as Aphrodite's thorns parasitized its very veins. As the blood of the fallen pooled on the ground, a dark realization struck Aphrodite's fading consciousness. A thin red line of blood began stretching toward the palace, an omen of a terrible oracle. All who died this day would soon serve a much darker master. Ella sprinted toward Benjamin, finding him hunched over the fallen Aphrodite. Benjamin's hands were stained crimson as he cradled the man's head, which hung limp like a broken branch. Blood trickled steadily from Aphrodite's ear. Ella's eyes narrowed. The fire was gone from the warrior, he looked hollow. She warned Benjamin that if the man couldn't hold on, he should be removed before he caused more trouble. Benjamin wiped the dark red stains onto his trousers, his voice heavy. "His ear is ruined," he muttered. He asked Ella to watch their perimeter while he prepared to move the wounded man to Gallon for treatment. But as Benjamin reached out, Aphrodite gripped his clothes, forcing himself upright. Leaning close, Benjamin caught the man's ragged whisper, "The goddess's oracle, humanity must cease its infighting. Every death only feeds the evil god of the capital." Aphrodite collapsed back against Benjamin, panting like an exhausted dog. Ella scoffed, her voice rising with sharp skepticism. She questioned if the Pale Church lunatics would ever stop their slaughter and, more importantly, if these goddesses were even reliable, considering they were the source of the chaos. Benjamin remained calm. He assured her his judgment was unclouded. Using his mind blade, he lifted Aphrodite and began the march toward the main force. "Our plan will not change," he declared firmly. Nearby, the battlefield fell silent as Gallon delivered a final, crushing stomp to a bone knight's skull, shattering the steel-hard armor into powder. Covered in black blood and nursing broken ribs, Gallon met Benjamin's group. Ella smugly tossed a silver-gray iron ball, a trophy from her own skirmish, while Gallon signaled for medics. A healer arrived, applying pungent green herbs to Aphrodite's mangled ear. When Benjamin relayed the oracle's warning, Gallon's expression darkened. They agreed the evil god had to be eliminated immediately. Benjamin looked toward the horizon, noting that those he trusted were already moving. To the north, Clement led the soldiers of the United Commune toward the camp of the Northern Wolf Riders. Massive gray wolves watched them with predatory intensity. A veteran general approached, recognizing Clement as the Blade of the North, a title from 40 years ago that made Clement flinch. Clement wasted no time on nostalgia. He spoke of their common enemy and the threat of the Pale Church. The general listened, eventually signaling his riders. With a single command, the wolves rose as one. Like autumn leaves caught in a gale, the riders vanished into a fast, silent run toward the capital. The crescent moon knight moved through the ruins of the tower with the grace of an ibex. His four hooves trod precisely upon broken stone slabs and precarious floorboards, his broad, centaurian body squeezing through narrow passages until he found his vantage point. He crouched, resting his longbow on his shoulder, regulating his breath as he overlooked the main street. Suddenly, the sound of flapping wings. A massive eagle with a wingspan wider than a clock tower swooped toward him. In its talons, it carried a young man named Diona, who gripped a spear known as the Red Rose. The knight did not hesitate. He nocked an arrow and released it with fluid lethality. The arrow was a blur. Diona couldn't track it with his eyes, but the Red Rose, a sentient, living weapon, could. The spear twirled instinctively, its tip striking the arrow shaft and sending it exploding into the ruins behind them. "That was close," the Red Rose cried. "We almost became roasted birds." Diona ignored the chatter, his eyes locked on the centaur. "Lord Ferdinand, come closer." He shouted to the eagle. Ferdinand accelerated, his body becoming a living projectile launched at the tower. A second arrow flashed through the air, faster than the first. Diona raised the spear and the clash of metal exploded in the air. The impact left his arm numb and useless. "You are no match for him," the Red Rose warned. "This battle must be fought by me." Ferdinand reached the summit, folding his wings to plummet toward the roof. The crescent moon knight attempted to reposition, firing a terrifyingly accurate backhand shot that shaved feathers from the eagle's wing. As the centaur leaped across collapsing balconies to create distance, Diona tumbled from the eagle's talons onto the roof tiles. Beside him, Ferdinand shifted back into human form. The two stood side by side, facing the silent, assessing gaze of the knight. Then, the centaur charged. Diona met him head-on while Ferdinand transformed into a giant wolf pouncing from the flank. The knight used his bow like a blade, striking Diona's spear with monstrous, demonic strength that sent the boy sliding backward. With a powerful kick, the centaur's horsehaft sent the giant wolf crashing into a wall. "Throw the yellow rose," the Red Rose screamed. Diona hurled his second weapon, a sword that spun through the air with a will of its own. It severed the knight's bow and sliced across his wrist in one fluid motion. Simultaneously, the Red Rose spear curved in an impossible arc, bypassing the knight's guard to bite a chunk of flesh from his side. "Tui," the spear spat. A mouthful of hair, the knight retreated, his voice resonating deep within his chest. "What kind of fighting style is this? It is truly insidious." "As long as we win," Diona replied, his eyes burning, "the means do not matter." The knight's response was horrific. From beneath his own ribs, a new bow grew, a pulsating weapon of bone and veins. He fired 3 arrows in a single breath. Diona and Ferdinand barely survived the volley as the roof disintegrated into smoke and dust. In the chaos, the two warriors clashed across the rooftops. Diona was outmatched in speed and strength, but his sentient weapons acted as shields and counterstrikers. Yet, the knight's angelic vitality seemed inexhaustible until he found his opening. The knight's bow pierced through Diona's abdomen. "Victory is assured," the knight declared, but then, a chill. A black snake hidden against Diona's arm lashed out and sank its fangs into the knight's neck, injecting a lethal Southern Territory venom. Diona used his final strength to sever the knight's fingers with the yellow rose as the snake transformed back into Ferdinand. The giant wolf scooped up the bleeding Diona and leaped away. Behind them, the crescent moon knight collapsed. The venom corroded his internal organs, fighting against his angelic healing until his flesh began to fester and peel. He tried to raise his bow one last time, but his strength had vanished. The great centaur knelt, then tumbled from the roof, crashing into the rubble below. On the tiles above, only a pool of black blood and severed fingers remained. Walter and Percival, leading the elite troops of Frosttown, rushed into the palace with a singular, driving purpose. They moved like a gale, never stopping to glance at the undead blocking their path. Behind them, Sylvie's soldiers acted as a tireless meat grinder, crushing every monster into dust. Walter did not need to think, he only needed to obey. The voice of Benjamin echoed in his mind through their psychic connection. Turn left, turn right, go straight. Beside him, Percival talked incessantly, his voice tight with anxiety. He spoke of the Rust Knight, the legendary warrior of the Pale Church who had fallen into demonic ways. Even if the two of us attacked together, Percival whispered urgently, we would be no match for him. Walter's response was cold. If you are afraid of dying, you can leave now. Percival fell silent. He could not reconcile his faith with the horror before them. The ascetic knights he once idolized, warriors who renounced all worldly pleasure, now looked no different from demons. He shook off the thought as they crossed the threshold into the palace. Inside, a thick gray mist swallowed the spires and columns. It was eerily quiet. No monsters, no movement, only the sound of their own footsteps. Benjamin's voice flickered one last time in Walter's mind. You are my secret weapon. You bear the heaviest responsibility. I will not betray this trust, Walter vowed. They followed the only signposts available, bloodstains. Tiny streams of red flowed from every street and ruin, crawling along the stone slabs toward the heart of the building. The air grew stifling, a wet, unnatural heat that felt like stepping into the belly of a living creature. Percival stumbled, pressing a hand against the wall. For a fleeting second he felt a pulse, a slow, heavy heartbeat, and saw dark red vessels writhing beneath the stone. He recoiled, but when he looked again, there was only moldy rock. What is it? Walter called out. Nothing, Percival lied, sweating beneath his helmet. Just a hallucination. They reached the end of the corridor, an irregularly shaped hole torn open from the inside. A putrid stench wafted out, smelling of ancient, fermented rot. Walter raised his lantern, the light trembling against the dark. Outside the perimeter, Sylvie stood upon a collapsed archway. The scarlet eyes embedded in his flesh were moving, sensing the flow of souls and the trajectory of the blood. He watched as the life force of the city converged deep within the palace, wriggling and splitting like a developing embryo. Someone beat me to it, Sylvie murmured. The Rust Knight stood like a statue at his side. I am not surprised. Sylvie watched the rhythm of the palace, the birth of something new. No, not a birth, a stillbirth. The passage opened to a sight of pure nightmare. It was not stone or wood, but flesh. Dark red walls writhed with a rhythmic, sickening pulse, coated in a viscous liquid that glistened under the lantern's glow. Percival followed Walter into the throat of the tunnel, his helmet cast aside, sweat streaming down a face flushed with an unnatural internal heat. As they stepped forward, the ground yielded like the tongue of a massive beast, warm, damp, and undulating. With every step they felt something, wriggling, beneath their boots. Thick blood vessels, intertwined like ancient roots, bulged from the walls, carrying a dark, rhythmic flow, but the true horror lay in the faces. Human features emerged from the meat, distorted, sinking, and bobbing like drowning men. Percival stared at the face of a young man, frozen in a look of pure confusion. He wondered, was he the only one seeing this? The tunnel widened into a vast, stinking cavern. In the center lay a lake of blood, an oily, dark red expanse gathered from every battlefield in the capital. Floating in the middle was a grayish-white vesicle, an oval egg covered in a semi-transparent membrane. Beneath the surface, blurry, human-shaped outlines shifted. It looked like a fetus. Dead before it was ever born, Walter felt it, a faint, rhythmic heartbeat radiating from the egg, seeping into their very bones. Destroy it, he commanded. 2 soldiers fired their steam-powered crossbows, but the bolts stopped dead in midair, hovering for a heartbeat before snapping back at the shooters with lethal speed. Walter deflected the projectiles with a flash of his blade, roaring for the men to stay behind him. Then, the room transformed. The faces peeled away from the walls, dripping with slime as they fell to the floor. Inhuman figures, skinless and eyeless, dropped from the ceiling, struggling to their feet. Walter's hands shifted into dragon claws, his head morphing into the visage of a fire dragon as he spewed flames to incinerate the horde. Percival stood frozen. He didn't see the monsters. Instead, he saw his own life, the church of his youth, his prayers, his pride in his Templar armor. He felt a crushing mental exhaustion. Why was he here? What did any of it mean? Percival! Walter's roar shattered the vision just as a monster lunged. Percival struck out mechanically, hacking the creature into a pulp. Walter turned his full fury toward the egg, unleashing a torrent of dragon fire. The vesicle trembled, its veins bulging as it let out a sharp, piercing cry that gripped every heart in the room. The flames died instantly. Percival's memories exploded in his mind, his parents, his prayers, the blood on his hands, all rushing back as he finally regained his senses. But it was too late. Beneath their feet, the palace floor began to collapse. The cry erupted from deep underground, a sound so violent it shook the very foundations of the city. Cobblestones leaped from the streets and cracks spiderwebbed across every wall. Soldiers collapsed, clutching their ears in agony. Ella, white-knuckled at the helm of her chariot, fought the controls as the iron wheels threw sparks against a crumbling wall. "Who is yelling like that?" She roared, her voice barely audible over the thunder of the steam engine. Beside her, Benjamin watched in horror as the palace began to sink. The earth opened its mouth, swallowing the grand buildings into a void of rubble and dust. Far below, in the dark, Sylvie rose from the ruins. He stood upon an ancient street, a relic of the wizard empire buried beneath the modern capital. Above him, the palace hung precariously over a massive abyss. Suddenly, a sword tip hovered inches from Sylvie's brow. A young, trembling soldier from Frosttown stood over him, his face masked in grime. Sylvie didn't flinch. "Your courage is commendable," he whispered, "but it seems only courage remains." As the soldier tried to shout, his vision tilted. He saw his own boots, then the floor, then a pair of black iron boots that did not belong to him. His head slid from his shoulders. Behind him stood the rust knight, flicking blood from a cold blade. "We are late," the knight rasped. "We must secure the goddess's remains." Sylvie smiled, his face crowded with too many eyes. "Don't rush, I know exactly where she is." They moved deeper into the cavity, passing ancient tablets that spoke of the royal family's fear of the magic suppressed beneath them. They reached a massive, hollow chamber, the abdomen of the ruins. In the center, amidst a pool of drying blood, sat a translucent egg. Standing guard was Walter, his armor drenched, clutching a throbbing, ripped organ in his hand. "That is our goal," Sylvie murmured. The rust knight blurred into motion. 6 swords struck at once. Walter unleashed his mind blade, a massive, scaled dragon head that snapped at the knight, but the knight's 6 arms wove a net of steel, shredding the dragon to mist. Walter counterattacked, his arm transforming into a spiked dragon's tail, sending the knight tumbling across the stone. Percival, a Templar knight, stepped forward, his sword crackling with blue-white lightning. "Rust Knight," he bellowed, "have you sold your soul?" The knight felt only pity. He knew the truth, their goddess was going mad. She would soon depart and the church would fall. To survive, they needed a new god. The battle became a blur of violence. Percival's lightning charred the knight's skin, but the 6-armed monstrosity was too fast, too heavy. Nearby, Walter tore into Sylvie, his dragon claws ripping open the man's chest until ribs snapped and blood gushed. Sylvie only looked down at the hole in his heart, then back at Walter with a chilling calm. "Even if I stand still," he whispered as the flesh began to knit back together, "you cannot kill me." Sylvie's chest wound was healing, the broken ribs knitting back into place and torn muscles regenerating with unnatural speed. In just a few seconds, only a faint scar remained. His gaze drifted over Walter, landing on the empty egg. Where did the stillborn fetus go? Walter did not answer. He was not in the habit of chatting with the enemy during a life-or-death struggle. The egg had been empty when he and Percival found it. Only a single, still-wriggling organ remained inside. Walter's intuition screamed that this was what Benjamin had sent him to find, but he had no time to confirm it. The Rust Knight's sword had already arrived. The sight of 6 arms attacking simultaneously was the most terrifying display of swordsmanship Walter had ever witnessed. No fancy techniques, just the cold, efficient precision of a meat grinder. Percival stepped forward first, his thunder sword clashing against the Rust Knight's steel. Sparks flew. But even as one of the finest Templar knights, Percival looked like a child who had just learned to hold a blade. Walter rushed in to take his place. His dragon-transformed arm collided with the knight's sword, scales shattered and blood splattered the stone floor. He retreated, then charged again. New wounds appeared across his body, but they healed faster than any ordinary man's. This was the power of the Nen blade. His draconic physique allowed him to recover at a staggering pace. Yet he was losing ground, each collision forced him back a step. The Rust Knight's 6 arms were a sophisticated engine of death, constantly spinning and cutting. Walter felt like a piece of meat being thrown into a millstone, being ground up piece by piece. He held on just long enough until Benjamin arrived. A thunderous noise erupted from overhead. A shadow fell straight down from the cave entrance, fast as lightning. Sylvie looked up, realizing the shadow was targeting him. He raised his arm to block, and then his right arm disappeared below the elbow. Benjamin landed, hovering an inch off the ground. Behind him, Ella was falling from midair, her face pale, her hands flailing wildly. When she hit the ground, her knees buckled. She nearly collapsed, grabbing Benjamin's arm just to stay upright. How could he possibly get here so quickly? Sylvie's mind raced. He had ordered tens of thousands of pale crusaders to surround the palace. Even if they couldn't stop Benjamin, they should have delayed him for hours. What he didn't know were the 2 secrets to Benjamin's speed. First, the wolf riders of the north. These warriors, riding giant wolves, had joined the fray. They were fast as the wind, their claws tearing through the crusaders' flanks. The second reason, Benjamin had injected himself with a vial of holy blood. It was a freshly extracted dose left by Chesvia. Benjamin had hesitated, but the voice of Bishop Sokka echoed in his mind. Sevier and the others are a step behind, but they'll catch up soon. Benjamin hadn't waited. He had plunged the glass tube into his arm, pushing the crimson liquid into his veins. The enhanced mind blade allowed him to do the impossible, using his mind to fly. It sounded simple, but controlling one's own body in the air was far more difficult than controlling 100 flying swords. Benjamin looked at Sylvie with cold eyes. The Pale Church of the East is finished. If you surrender, I might consider a lenient sentence. A lenient sentence? You, Sylvie lifted his severed arm. The bleeding had already stopped and new flesh was bubbling from the stump. You thought, he never finished the sentence. A stone struck him in the face. It wasn't an ordinary stone, it had been accelerated by mental focus to the speed of a crossbow bolt. His nose collapsed, teeth flew out, and he fell backward. Before he even hit the ground, 3 more stones whistled through the air, striking his chest, abdomen, and thigh. The sound of bones snapping was sickeningly clear. Sylvie rolled across the floor, his body already knitting itself back together, but as he tried to stand, the air itself seemed to thicken. Gravel floated around him, blades hovered above his head. Every movement required 10 times the usual effort. He tried to rush Benjamin, but a powerful repulsive force sent him flying back. Holy blood, Sylvie realized the truth. Benjamin's psychic blade was now godlike, but his body was still mortal. Sylvie decided to stall. As long as he could survive the duration of the blood's effects, he would win. He turned and ran not toward Benjamin, but toward the Frosttown soldiers. He would force Benjamin to choose between the kill and his men. He took 2 steps. Suddenly, his body became weightless. He wasn't being grabbed, he was being sucked in. A tremendous force pulled him into midair. He struggled, limbs flailing, but the gravity was absolute. Gravel flew in from all directions, enveloping him layer by layer. 1, 2, 10, 100 stones. The earth seemed alive, clinging to him, piling up thicker and thicker, pressing down with agonizing weight. Light disappeared. Sound was cut off. Sylvie was plunged into utter darkness. This is outrageous, he thought to himself. While Benjamin dealt with Sylvie, Ella turned her attention to the Rust Knight. The 6-armed monster was still dominating Walter and Percival. Percival was beaten so badly he felt the goddess wouldn't recognize his face. Make way, make way. Ella shouted, her voice echoing through the cavern. Let me do it. Walter grabbed Percival and darted to the side. The Rust Knight stopped. He turned his metallic gray body toward the woman charging at him. His 6 arms hung at his sides, sword tips pointing down, gleaming coldly in the dim light. Ella stopped in front of him. She didn't draw her sword. She didn't even take a fighting stance. She simply stood there, sizing him up with a confident, almost hungry smile. She loved armor, and this knight was covered in it. Recently, she began, her tone dripping with feigned modesty, the enemies I've faced were hardly wearing anything at all. Deathborn, clouds of smoke, naked werewolves, she sighed dramatically. It's gotten to the point where everyone is starting to doubt my true strength. The Rust Knight stared at her, his voice a hollow, metallic rasp. "What are you talking about?" Ella gave him a friendly, terrifying smile. "I'll give you a 5-second head start." The Rust Knight quickly understood what Ella meant by giving him a 5-second head start. Within those 5 seconds, he began to regret not turning away and running. His sword began to melt before it even touched her. The steel blades deformed, dripping into the air like candles thrown into a fire. He swung his fist, and then those fists began to melt. The metallic skin covering his arms turned from grayish-white to a scalding, bright red. Liquid metal dripped from his fingers as he felt his body being peeled away, layer by layer. He tried to retreat, but his feet were already turning to syrup, revealing the charred muscle tissue underneath. Only then did the knight realize Ella's terrifying power. She could manipulate high-temperature metal. For a man whose body was his weapon, a man made of steel, there was no way out. He was being roasted by his own skin. He collapsed to his knees, his metallic exterior pooling into a dark red liquid on the ground. By the time Benjamin walked over, the thing kneeling there was barely recognizable as human. "Is he dead?" Benjamin asked. Ella glanced at the charred remains with a hint of smugness. For Lady Ella, an opponent of this caliber is merely an appetizer. She pointed to the exhausted soldiers. "But your subordinates need serious training. Being defeated by this is hardly reassuring." Benjamin poked her forehead, silencing her boasting. "Stop showing off, they are not nobody." Walter approached, handing Benjamin a bloody, throbbing organ, the womb of the goddess of magic. It was fresh, vibrant, and deeply unsettling. Why had the enemy abandoned such a prize? Benjamin felt a growing unease. Even with his mental radar, he could find no trace of the evil god. As the soldiers began cleaning the battlefield, Ella marveled at the ruins of the underground city, a relic of the ancient magical age. But Benjamin's focus remained on the present. He walked toward the enormous rock sphere where the enemy leader, Sylvie, was entombed. With a wave of his hand, Benjamin peeled back the stone to reveal the man's head. "Give me one reason not to kill you," Benjamin demanded. Sylvie showed no fear. "I can give you 100. I know the secrets of the Pale Church. I know the Master's plans. A living man is far more useful to you than a corpse." Benjamin stared at the face covered in unnatural scarlet eyes. "I'll spare your breath for now." As the rock sealed Sylvie back into his dark, silent prison, Benjamin knew the war was far from over. Aphrodite woke to the suffocating stench of medicinal herbs. He lay on a crude wooden bed, his body a map of agony. As his eyes welled with tears from the sharp air, he struggled to remember. Had he died a hero's death against the wolf-headed enemy? He could almost picture the Baron preparing a rose-covered coffin, but the throbbing in his limbs suggested he was very much alive. He scanned the tent. Dozens of wounded soldiers lay in eerie silence. He realized with a jolt that he couldn't hear a single sound. Was he deaf? A figure sat by his bed, a man with long blue hair and piercing eyes. "Bishop Sokka," Aphrodite cried out, relieved to see a familiar face from the capital. The man coughed and spoke, but Aphrodite heard nothing. Relying on a half-forgotten lesson in lip-reading, Aphrodite squinted at the man's mouth. He thought he saw the words drinks and celebration. "A party with the Baron," Aphrodite cheered. "Order something weak, my stomach can't handle the strong stuff anymore." The man, who was actually Galon, gave him a look of pure pity and walked out. Aphrodite remained blissfully unaware that he had completely misread the conversation. Later, the tent flap pushed open again. It was Benjamin. He looked weary, a fresh scar marking his face. He sat down and spoke. Suddenly, his voice rang out clearly, not through Aphrodite's ears, but directly inside his mind. It was Benjamin's psychic link. "Galon said you lost your mind," Benjamin remarked dryly. Aphrodite relaxed. "Tell me, what happened to the capital?" Benjamin leaned back, his voice echoing in Aphrodite's thoughts. The strategic goals were met. They had found the goddess's remains beneath the palace and stopped the ritual. The Pale Church's commander was captured, and the Northern Wolf Riders had provided the necessary muscle to seize the city. However, the victory was complicated. The North was claiming the glory for themselves, and to the east, the Pale Church had declared independence, carving out a new theocracy. "Let Prince Alkea worry about that," Benjamin said with a sharp, knowing smile. "I'm just here to watch the show." Relieved that the world wasn't ending just yet, Aphrodite pulled the blanket over his head. "Wake me up," he muttered, "when the show starts." As the tent flap fell shut, he drifted back into a deep, healing sleep. Chesvia received the news the moment the campaign against the capital ended. She didn't wait for an official report or even for the sun to rise. She grabbed Evelyn, jumped onto a steam-powered transport wagon, and rattled toward the front lines through the pitch-black night. The vehicle bounced violently over the uneven road. Evelyn, tossed about like a rag doll, rubbed her bruised forehead against the metal carriage. "Minister," she groaned, "couldn't we have waited until dawn?" "No," Chesvia replied, her face illuminated by the dim light of the supply crates. "At dawn, the roads will be crowded. We don't have time to waste." By sunrise, they reached the camp. Through the dissipating mist and the smell of cooking fires, Chesvia spotted Benjamin giving a speech to the troops. Her tense expression finally melted. She smoothed her hair, forced a cheerful smile, and approached him just as he concluded. "This boss," she called out playfully. Benjamin turned, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Why are you here?" "To see our hero," she teased. They shared a quiet, intimate moment amidst the crowd. Chesvia leaned in, whispering, "Is the capital yours now?" Benjamin glanced around cautiously before leaning toward her ear. "Maybe, possibly, perhaps." He counted the fallen factions on his fingers, concluding that with his rivals dead or fled, the city was effectively his. Chesvia bowed with mock reverence. "My lord, I feel a bit chilly. Would a yellow robe be suitable for you to wear?" "Absolutely not." Benjamin waved his hands, realizing she was teasing him about taking the throne. "You're putting me in a difficult position." The playful tension was shattered when Ella strode between them, physically pushing them apart. "Be mindful of your behavior in public." Ella snapped. A sharp, petty argument erupted between the two women, a battle of status and biting wit. Sensing the danger, Benjamin grabbed Evelyn and made a quick exit. "I have special delicacies from the Celebration Church waiting for us," he promised. They arrived at a tent where a priest in colorful robes presented them with exquisite red boxes. Inside were pastries, not the overly sweet desserts of the region, but fragrant, flaky treats that melted in the mouth. As Benjamin ate, he reflected on the religious factions. While he remained wary of divine power, he acknowledged that these groups had stood as heroes against the dead ones. "Not bad," Benjamin murmured, savoring the taste of a hard-won peace. "Really, not bad." Benjamin declined the festival priest's silent plea to stay a little longer. The priest's eyes had practically begged him to sample more snacks, but Benjamin was stuffed. The man had brought out box after box, as if trying to empty the entire church's inventory. Making a quick excuse about important business, Benjamin and Evelyn made their escape. Their next stop was the territory of the Lingyuan Church. It was a tiny plot of land tucked between larger sects, fitting for their small population. Benjamin was there to see an old friend, Sokka. Though they had communicated for a long time through a telepathic blade, they had never actually met in person. Seeing a man with long blue hair at the entrance of a tent, Benjamin walked up warmly and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "I'm talking about you, Sokka brother." The man turned, his expression subtle. "Oh, I am Galon, Sokka's younger brother." Benjamin blinked, scrutinizing the face. They were nearly identical, though Galon's eyes were sharper, lacking Sokka's signature melancholy. "Ah, you two really do look alike," Benjamin said, quickly recovering. He mentioned his ties to the church through Aphrodite, unaware that Galon was a bit of a black sheep, a former deserter who had only recently returned to claim a bishop's seat. The conversation that followed was painfully dry. "How is Aphrodite?" Galon asked. "Fine," Benjamin replied, "just a problem with her ear." "That's a big problem," Galon muttered. "Did it damage her brain?" Silence fell, a cold, awkward silence. Evelyn stood behind them, clutching a box of pastries, silently praying for someone to save them. Then the savior appeared. Sokka stepped out of the tent. "Would you like to come in and sit down?" Inside the small tent, the atmosphere shifted. Benjamin and Sokka spoke of the war and the intelligence that had saved so many lives. Sokka expressed his deep gratitude, while Benjamin insisted the help was mutual. They spoke of the future of the reconstruction of the capital and the bonds formed between the sects. "One day," Sokka smiled, "I may relinquish my position and visit Frosttown." You're welcome anytime, Benjamin replied, then his eyes lit up. Do you remember our agreement? I promised to name your special moves. Sokka leaned in. I'd like to hear them. The golden threads, Benjamin gestured excitedly. Let's call that, flowing light asterisk, but your ultimate power, that devastating flood of energy. Benjamin paused for dramatic effect. That is the asterisk galactic explosion. Sokka didn't quite understand the words, but he nodded, humoring his friend's enthusiasm. All right, whatever you say. As Benjamin and Evelyn departed, Galon remained in the tent, staring at a pastry. He whispered the names to himself, flowing light, galactic explosion. I can do those too, he murmured, a spark of sibling rivalry reigniting. I can do those, even better. Rebuilding the capital was never just about stone and mortar. For Benjamin, the city was a symbol, a loud, clear message to the world. By seizing the heart of the kingdom, he proved he could do exactly what he promised. It gave his allies confidence, and his enemies a reason to tremble. The proof was piled high on his makeshift desk, letters from every corner of the land, stacked taller than a person. Benjamin reached for the familiar names first. Finn's message was blunt, well played, but be careful. Lawrence, on the other hand, sent pages of dense tactical and economic analysis. Then came the others, the West and the North, all offering congratulations that thinly veiled a desperate hunger to make money together. But then, Benjamin opened a letter from the newly formed Pale Theocracy. He paused, muttering, now it is a country within a country. The message was an ultimatum: release the Crusader commander, Sylvie, and return the Holy Spring territory. Benjamin didn't hesitate. He tossed the paper into the wastebasket, remarking that it was too rough to even use as toilet paper. Next was a handwritten letter from Alkea, the eldest prince of the kingdom of Lin Feng. Benjamin braced for arrogance but found something else entirely. There were no insults, only praise for Benjamin's contributions and a plea for unity. Alkea warned that the kingdom was fragmented and vulnerable, pray for dwarves, elves, and the church. He urged Benjamin to set aside their past for the sake of survival. Was it a sincere olive branch or a trap? Benjamin tried to think, but the room was thick with the sounds of bickering. Chesvia and Ella were at it again, shouting over the efficiency of steam engines and railcars. Hey, Benjamin snapped, rubbing his temples. I called you here for perspectives, not a shouting match. Chesvia shrugged, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. You know me, Benjamin, my advice is always the same: victory and conquest. Ella nodded in rare agreement, convinced that Alkea was merely a predator waiting to strike. Benjamin sighed. He missed the steady counsel of Hill and Lawrence, but his eyes drifted to a thick, brick-like book the women had been fighting over. What is that? He asked. Chesvia held it up. It was a relic found beneath the capital, a complete record of ancient revival facilities and the secrets of operating simulated magic using dust crystals. In a world of shifting loyalties, this book might be the only truth Benjamin had left. Benjamin had been reclining in his chair, idly flipping through letters, but the moment Chesvia mentioned the ruins beneath the capital, he sat bolt upright. Chesvia began to recount her discoveries. While Benjamin had been managing the chaos of the city, she, along with Evelyn and Diona, had been exploring the ancient, subterranean streets of the Wizard Empire. It was a treasure trove. Among the dust and stone, they found more than just novels. They found laboratories, factories, and complete sets of magical equipment. Chesvia pulled a heavy volume from a stack and pushed it toward him. This, she said, her voice dropping with gravity, is our greatest achievement. The basic explanation of imitation magic. Benjamin stared at the cover. He couldn't read the script, but he felt the physical weight of the knowledge within. Chesvia explained that when the ancient wizards lost their natural magic, they turned to dust crystals as an energy source. In terms Benjamin could understand, it was a wizard-specific generator. The energy conversion efficiency, Chesvia said, pausing for emphasis, is at least 70%. Benjamin's finger froze on the table. He gave a sharp thumbs up. Holy crap, awesome, but then his expression clouded. He questioned how such a technologically advanced civilization could be crushed by medieval soldiers with iron swords. Chesvia cleared her throat, looking away. The truth was embarrassing. The Empire had been so efficient at courting disaster that they perished before these designs could ever be realized. So it's just concepts, Benjamin sighed. We still have to build it ourselves. A playful argument broke out as Ella chimed in, defending their reliable if slightly explosive steam engines. Benjamin raised his hands like a referee. All right, as long as it's safe, I want to develop both. Later that night, the mood shifted. Evelyn stood before Benjamin's desk, a letter in her hand. Your Excellency, Lady Hill requires me to return to Pearl City. Benjamin put down his documents, a surge of genuine reluctance washing over him. I don't want you to leave, he said directly. Who will help me through these endless nights of overtime? Evelyn's expression softened, then turned slightly dry. You only think of me when you're working. I think about you all the time, Benjamin replied calmly. I just think about you more when there's paperwork. Evelyn smiled, reminding him that her consciousness spanned multiple bodies. He could find her other selves in Frost Town or Ironforge. As she turned to leave, Benjamin called out one last promise. I'll arrange a long vacation for you, really. Evelyn paused at the door, her voice trailing back. I'll be looking forward to it. Percival was drowning in a dream of the past, back when he was a novice cultivator. In the memory, his teacher points toward a distant, wounded figure hacking at a boulder. This was the legendary Rust Knight. With every slow, agonizing strike, the rock fractured until it finally shattered. His teacher's voice was a solemn command, Percival. You must become as indestructible as he is. Steel inside and out. When Percival wakes, his face is wet with tears. He stares at the ceiling of his tent, crushed by the weight of reality. He had faced that same Rust Knight in battle, and he had failed. His lightning-infused blade hadn't even left a white mark on the man's metallic skin. He hadn't lasted 10 moves. His Dao heart feels shattered. He wants nothing more than to lie in the dark until the end of time. But the world will not leave him be. The tent flap lifts and Benjamin enters, followed by the swaggering Aphrodite. Aphrodite's ears are heavily bandaged, rendering him deaf, yet he carries himself with his usual irritating confidence. He sets a pot of medicinal soup on the bedside table, misreading Percival's weak movements as a request to be hand-fed. How are you feeling? Benjamin asks, sitting on the edge of the bed. Percival can only whisper of his defeat. He is steel inside and out, he groans. An invincible opponent. Benjamin's expression turns subtle. Actually, Benjamin says, Ella's favorite kind of opponent is one made of literal steel. The realization hits Percival like a physical blow. Ella, the knight who manipulates metal, while Percival had fought a desperate, losing battle of destiny. Ella had simply melted the Rust Knight down into a heap of unrecognizable molten iron. There was no grand finale, just a mismatch of powers that ended his nightmare in seconds. Percival asks about the others. Sylvie has been captured and is currently babbling church secrets in exchange for food. Meanwhile, the Pale Church has retreated east to declare independence, forming a new theocracy. The silence in the tent grows heavy. Aphrodite, sensing the mood, presses the warm bowl of soup into Percival's trembling hands. He notes Percival's broken fingers with a shrug. If they don't heal, Aphrodite jests, you'll just have to learn to fight left-handed. Your swordsmanship might actually improve to passable. Percival looks at his friends, the bitterness of defeat mixing with the warmth of the broth. The legend of the Rust Knight was gone, melted away, leaving Percival to find a new path forward. Percival wanted to speak with Benjamin alone. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, Aphrodite stood up to leave. Then I won't bother you any longer, he said, heading toward the tent entrance. He paused, looking back with a wry smile. Just so you know. When those two brothers were fighting for the bishop's position, I was a staunch supporter of the Sokka faction. That is why Galon is still reluctant to talk to me. As Aphrodite vanished, the tent fell quiet. A few wounded soldiers lay in distant beds, their heavy snoring providing a rhythmic backdrop to the silence. Benjamin sat by the bed, offering no words. Percival leaned back against his pillows, his mind a storm of questions. He wanted to ask Benjamin about his self-perception, about the world, about things he had pondered for a lifetime. But the questions died on his lips. Mom and Dad, Percival whispered, are they doing well? Benjamin glanced at him, surprised. Before I brought the family to Frosttown, my eldest brother took care of them. Now they are doing quite well. Mom has our sisters with her and Dad helps me manage the territory. Is that so? Percival murmured. I haven't been in touch with them, not since I became a Templar Knight. Yes, Benjamin replied, his voice carrying a sharp edge. Mom was always worried something had happened to you, but when I went to Holy Spring territory I found out you simply didn't write. Percival had no strength to refute the barb. He asked instead about their married sisters. Benjamin explained they were in the West End, living their own lives. When Percival expressed concern that enemies might use the family to get to Benjamin, the younger brother softened his tone. There are many people named Blackwood. As long as they don't publicize it, they are safe. But did you ask me to stay just for this? You didn't care about these things before. Percival looked away. Maybe I've discovered that the identity of a Templar Knight isn't as sacred as I thought. I'm tired, Benjamin. I've been obsessed with glory for too long, but it is so easy to lose. I want to let go of this identity. I want to be a son again. Benjamin stared at him for a long time. Mom and Dad have never complained about you. If you want to see them, they will be happy. Once things are settled in the capital, I will take you back with me. As Benjamin stepped outside, Aphrodite emerged from the shadows. What were you talking about? Benjamin sighed. Percival's faith is shattered. He wants to go home. Aphrodite was shocked. Is it that serious? It is about losing one's soul, Benjamin explained. Imagine if I told you your goddess had a dark side. Could you accept that? Aphrodite's eyes widened in horror. Don't utter such blasphemy, he cried, his voice rising 8 octaves. Even as an analogy, that is impossible. Benjamin patted his shoulder, ushering him away. Okay, you're right, let's go before you wake the entire camp. Irwin arrived at the capital with a wagon full of propaganda and a heart full of anxiety. Before his entrance, Benjamin was occupied with Chesvia, debating an incomprehensible diagram in a pseudo-magic guide. Chesvia insisted the spiral lines were energy channels, while Benjamin argued it looked more like a wizard showing off a magnificent, curly beard. Their bickering was cut short by the practicalities of lunch. Chesvia asked what Benjamin wanted to eat, and when he suggested roast meat and vegetables because Ella wanted it, Chesvia gave him a pointed look. I asked what asterisk you wanted, she sighed, before heading to the kitchen with a promise to see them at noon. The door had barely closed when Irwin burst in, followed by servants hauling heavy trunks. He bypassed the pleasantries and slammed a suitcase onto the table. These weren't just clothes, they were years of tax data and commercial maps from Frosttown. Once they were alone, Irwin's playful demeanor vanished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. Where do you plan to locate your future development center, the capital or Frosttown? Benjamin realized the source of Irwin's dread. He reached out, patting his friend's shoulder. Don't worry, Brother Irwin, Frosttown is my home. It will always be the center. Relief washed over Irwin and he quickly pivoted back to his specialty, image manufacturing. He unveiled his latest propaganda, flyers depicting Benjamin on horseback with a literal halo. Benjamin winced, muttering that it looked like the work of a usurper, but Irwin dismissed the concern. To him, it wasn't a coup, it was destiny. As they discussed the place still called the capital and the independence of the Eastern Territory, Irwin turned the conversation toward the personal. You lack an heir, he stated bluntly. He wasn't just speaking for himself but for the other lords. He even suggested his daughter Lena as a potential match. Benjamin's response was firm. The great cause is not yet accomplished. I cannot afford to develop any more weaknesses. Irwin nodded, accepting the answer for now, though he remained fiercely protective of his daughter's interests. Their heavy political maneuvering was finally interrupted by Ella's voice booming from the hallway, threatening to kick the door in if they didn't come out for lunch. As they walked toward the dining room, Irwin paused at the door, one last question lingering in the air. That bit about the great undertaking, he asked casually, that wasn't just an excuse, was it? Benjamin only coughed, leading the way toward the smell of roast meat. The door swings open with a bang, and there stands Ella, hands on her hips, looking ready to tear the entire house down. She spots Irwin and scoffs. Oh, so the Silver Creek territory is here too. Irwin quickly flashes his practiced social smile. Lady Ella, it has been a long time. You look wonderful, don't give me that, she snaps, turning on her heel. Eat, and don't blame me if the food gets cold. Inside a two-story mansion on a rare, intact street in the capital, Chesvia is busy setting the table. She gestures toward a massive platter of thick-sliced roast meat and golden brown vegetables. "Vegetables and meat," she says softly to Benjamin, "exactly what you wanted." The four of them sit, the only sound is the rhythmic clinking of cutlery. Ella eats with a ferocious speed, her cheeks bulging, while Chesvia eats slowly, carefully placing choice morsels onto Benjamin's plate. In the corner, Erwin barely touches his food, his eyes darting nervously between the three of them. "Brother Erwin," Benjamin asks, "is it not to your liking?" "No, no," Erwin stammers, quickly swallowing a piece of meat. "It is excellent." Halfway through the meal, Ella drops her fork. "So, how is the pseudo-magic research coming along?" Chesvia wipes her mouth, her expression turning serious. "The diagrams in that book are more complicated than we imagined. Some are completely incomprehensible." "Exactly," Benjamin adds with a grin. "There is one picture that looks like a wizard showing off his beard, but she insists it is an energy conversion device." As Ella giggles, Erwin finds himself unable to join the conversation. His mind wanders to his daughter, Lena, a girl he pushed into the family business far too early. When Benjamin pulls him back to reality, Erwin sighs. "I was just thinking of Lena, all alone in Silverbrook. I wonder if she is managing." "Miss Lena is very efficient," Chesvia reassures him. "Maybe your daughter is much better than you," Ella adds bluntly, before Benjamin gives her a sharp kick under the table. Later, after Erwin departs, Benjamin sits alone, poring over the translated magic guides. He knows these yarnball drawings represent a potential technological explosion, a way to replace inefficient coal with clean, powerful dust crystals. A soft, hesitant footstep sounds at the door. "Come in," Benjamin calls out. Aphrodite pokes his head in, his ear still bandaged. He fidgets, asking after the women before finally settling into a chair. "All right, Bishop," Benjamin sighs, pouring a glass of water. "What is on your mind?" Aphrodite clears his throat. "It is about Percival. Is he truly serious about going home to farm? He is impulsive, not very bright. It seems a waste." Benjamin eyes him suspiciously. "Since when did you care so much?" "I am not concerned," Aphrodite denies, though a trace of melancholy touches his face. "It is just, we have been through so much, from the conflicts in the Spring Territory to the struggles in the South. The friendship of being tortured together." Benjamin teases. "Only he was tortured," Aphrodite retorts, before leaning in close. "Look, he is in his prime. Do you think it is possible for Percival to convert?" The goddess is all-encompassing. She would not mind that he was once, well, dirty. Benjamin stares at him in dead silence. "Would you dare say those exact words to his face?" Ella woke up early today, not by choice, but because of a relentless metallic banging. The clanging started in the dark and refused to stop, piercing through her walls, her windows, and even the pillow she desperately wrapped around her head. Frustrated, she threw off the covers and shouted into the empty room, "Who is knocking out there?" She scrambled to find her boots. One was hidden under the bed, the other kicked toward the doorway. After a clumsy struggle of hopping and crawling, she finally made it outside into the broad daylight. Nearby, engineers were hammering away on a new structure. When Ella demanded to know why they were making such a racket, the lead sapper stood at attention. He explained it was the Baron's order. A new warehouse had to be finished by noon. "That wretched servant," Ella muttered. After washing up, she headed to find Benjamin. She found his temporary office guarded by two men. One blocked her path, explaining that the Baron was currently entertaining a guest, the bishop of the Celebration Church, who had brought refreshments. Ella waited, arms crossed, until the door opened. A middle-aged man in vibrant robes stepped out, carrying a food box. He offered her a smile and a pastry, but Ella brushed him off. Inside, Benjamin sat behind a desk piled with documents, a half-eaten snack in his hand. Ella sat opposite him, complaining about the noise. Benjamin explained that the warehouses were for the massive amount of goods cleared from the capital ruins. He offered her a piece of his pastry, a sweet and sour jam-filled treat, and she reluctantly accepted. They spoke of the bishop. Benjamin noted that as the new master of the capital, he had to get acquainted with the local churches. Ella laughed, calling the Celebration Church parasites who only cared for festivals. If they heard you, Benjamin chuckled, they would throw a celebration just to expel you. Perfect, Ella replied, I'll drive them all out myself. Then her tone shifted. She informed Benjamin that her mother, Countess Danif Pascal, wished to meet her promising young ally. Ella mimicked her mother's formal tone with a look of pure disdain. Benjamin agreed to go within the month, adding that he couldn't refuse Ella's mother. But then, Benjamin made a mistake. He mused aloud about how the Countess was a renowned beauty and admitted he was nervous to meet her. Ella stared at him as if he were trash. What are you saying to me, your daughter? Before he could react, Ella lunged. Her forehead slammed into his with a solid asterisk thud. Benjamin nearly toppled over in his chair, clutching a growing bump on his brow. Serves you right, Ella huffed, rubbing her own head and looking away. As silence settled over the room, Ella whispered softly to herself, anyway, she looks about the same as me, so what is there to be nervous about? Alkea has been savoring a rare, luxurious comfort lately, especially when it comes to his sleep. For years, a haunting voice rang in his head before every dawn, a punctual, cruel alarm clock that whispered, admit it, you are not good enough. He used to roll over, covering his ears, but the voice would simply seep directly into his brain. To survive, he had to start every morning by chanting a desperate mantra, I am really great, but now the voice is gone. Like a plug being pulled from a socket, the silence is absolute. Alkea lies on his soft bed, eyes closed, listening only to the wind and the distant birdsong. The capital, that source of all evil, has been defeated. The evil god is gone, the spirit is quiet, and the world is finally at peace. Outside, the endless snow has stopped, replaced by a gentle, golden warmth. Even the thought of the foul-tasting, plaster-like cabbage from Frosttown can't ruin his mood. However, as he rolls over, reality begins to sour his tranquility. New problems are rising to threaten his position as the legitimate heir to the kingdom of Lingfeng. First, there is the pale theocracy in the east. Those holy men have stopped pretending. One minute they claim the church doesn't interfere in secular affairs, and the next, they've declared independence. If Alkea doesn't crack down now, he'll inherit nothing but an empty shell of a kingdom. The second problem is more personal, Benjamin Blackwood. Benjamin's army has stormed the capital. Alkea's father-in-law, the Grand Duke of the North, is helping, but Alkea suspects the old man is already looking to marry off another one of his many daughters to Benjamin to hedge his bets. Alkea hates the idea of a civil war. He considers himself a man of peace, but Benjamin's growing power is a suffocating weight. And then, there are the monsters. Reports are flooding in from the western frontier. Genuine dragons, creatures thought to be extinct for decades, are destroying villages. To make matters worse, rumors from the Silver Empire suggest that magic has returned to the land. This is a nightmare for humanity. Humans are immune to magic, meaning if the elves or the aggressive dwarves regain their ancient powers, mankind will be defenseless. The weight of it all, the politics, the dragons, the betrayal of the church, presses down on Alkea like a pile of stones. He needs comfort. He needs his wife, the Pearl of the North. For years, he stayed away from her bed, fearing the evil spirit would possess him at his weakest, most intimate moment. He endured her confusion and her growing resentment through sheer, agonizing self-discipline. But tonight was supposed to be different. The spirit is gone. He is finally free to be a husband. He sits bolt upright, fists clenched, eyes blazing with newfound purpose until the door bangs open. Charles strides in, clutching a stack of documents, his face lit with that familiar, annoying zeal. Your Highness, regarding the counterattack on the royal territory, shut up. Alkea snaps, the frustration boiling over. He takes a deep breath, whispering to himself to stay calm before pulling the blanket back over his head. Your Highness. Charles asks, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. Get out, comes the muffled voice from under the covers. But, the counterattack, Geo out. The first world's #1 Rinpu martial arts tournament began, with a single pot of wine. That evening, Benjamin sat in the capital, exhausted, feeling like a dried-out salted fish. He stared at the endless documents on his desk, wondering when this wretched, silent tomb of a city would ever come alive again. The streets were deserted, the shops were closed. It was deathly still. Then came Aphrodite. Carrying a jug of medicinal wine, he sat opposite Benjamin and crossed his legs. Barren, he remarked, you look like you just crawled out of a coffin. As they drank the bitter liquid, Aphrodite leaned in, his eyes bright. Don't you think this city is too stifling? When it was busy, the streets were packed. Now, not a soul. Benjamin sighed, noting that most of the citizens were now lying in the cemetery, but Aphrodite slammed his cup down. How about we hold a martial arts tournament? Call in the skilled fighters. The winners get prizes and honor. Entertainment is what draws people together, Benjamin. Once the drums sound and the arena is set, the vendors will return. The streets will be packed. That is what a royal capital should look like. Benjamin promised to think about it, but by the next morning the spark had already become a wildfire. Aphrodite had been busy. He told Bishop Sokka, who gave a silent nod of approval. He told Bishop Gallon, whose eyes lit up at the chance to prove his strength. He told the Temple of the Earth Mother, the Church of Celebrations, and even the North's Wolf Riders. By the time the news reached Benjamin, it had spiraled out of control. Chesvia burst into his office, panicked. Benjamin, there are rumors. They say the winner can pick any treasure from the royal treasury, that they'll be made a marquis. Benjamin dropped his pen in shock. Who said that? I don't have that kind of power. But it was too late. The temple was already selecting warriors. The Church of Celebrations was preparing dancers. The Wolf Riders were boasting they could win unarmed. Benjamin chuckled in exasperation. The speed of the rumor proved one thing: the people were starving for a spectacle. He sent for Erwin, the master of propaganda, to manage the madness. Erwin was thrilled, his eyes gleaming at the golden opportunity. Leave it to me, Erwin promised, already plotting. We are going to make the name of the United Commune resound throughout the land. The entire kingdom will soon know the news of the first world's greatest martial arts tournament. That was the guarantee made by Erwin, whose propaganda machine moved with ruthless efficiency. From the United Merchants Guild posting notices in every town to storytellers spinning yarns in smoky taverns, the word spread like wildfire along every trade route. The posters depicted a colossal arena, packed with spectators, where warriors clashed in epic combat. It was billed as the grandest event since the capital's reconstruction, a tournament organized by the Baron of Frosttown to boost morale and unearth the realm's hidden talents. The call was simple: no entry requirements, no background questions. As long as you can fight, come and sign up. The registration queue in the central square stretched for 3 city blocks. It was a chaotic melting pot of ambition. Polished knights stood beside ragged mercenaries, while an elf from the Silver Empire boasted of his archery, and a burly man from the West Frontier claimed his bare fists were harder than any hammer. Even a woman from the north arrived, leading a wolf she claimed was stronger than any man. Then, the prizes were revealed. First place would earn the title the bravest of the 3 armies, with a sword inscribed by the Baron himself. For Walter, this was not just a prize, it was destiny. He locked himself away, convinced the blade was forged for him alone. When the news reached Ella, she was mid-practice. She drove her sword into the dirt and sprinted to find Benjamin. Bursting into the room, she nearly took the door off its hinges. "You genius handyman," she roared, punctuating her excitement by punching Benjamin so hard he staggered. She insisted on entering and demanded the veteran Clement join as well. Despite his age, Clement's eyes sparked with a long-awaited fire. "Since it is the young lady's wish," he remarked, "we have no choice." But not everyone was celebrating. In the Southern Territory, Finn slammed his food down in a fit of pique. He paced his tent, fuming that his former student Benjamin hadn't invited him personally. He penned a letter, thousands of words of dramatic heartbreak and scolding, only to end it with a desperate plea: write down every detail of the fights. And tell me sooner next time. Meanwhile, in the West, Alkia looked upon the news with a strange, detached smile. Having recently acquired a dark, new power, he felt above such trivialities. He chuckled at the world's #1 title, shook his head, and in his newfound arrogance, decided to forgive the Baron's lack of etiquette. As the capital hums with the sound of overnight construction, the stage is set, the world is watching. The qualifying rounds were a relentless headache for Benjamin. Between soldiers returning from the field looking like they'd survived a war and the endless, petty complaints of contestants, his patience was wearing thin. Some grumbled about uneven rings, others about the smell of rotten egg soup from a neighboring tent, but the real trouble was closer to home. Everyone in Benjamin's inner circle had signed up for the elimination rounds. Even Chesvia joined the fray, provoked by Ella's boastful claim that she would easily take first place. Ella believed Chesvia lacked battlefield experience, but Benjamin knew better. He imagined Chesvia roasting the overconfident Ella with purifying fire and lightning. Yet seeing Ella's smug expression, he kept his warnings to himself. The list of the top 100 contestants was now in Benjamin's hands. In the capital, wealthy merchants and nobles were betting feverishly. The odds shifted daily from Walter to Diona and then, surprisingly, to Aphrodite. Benjamin looked down at the woman in the wheelchair he was pushing. "If you were participating," he said, "I'd bet on you." Celia didn't look up from her knitting. "Me, I no longer want to wield a sword." Though her legs had long since healed, Celia chose the wheelchair, finding a strange comfort in doing nothing. As they moved through the bustling streets, Benjamin asked her to analyze the list. Celia's eyes scanned the names before she identified the true threats. "Your new friends," she murmured, "have the potential to win." She pointed first to Sokka. Watching him preach outside the church, Celia noted how he integrated martial arts into every breath. "Life is a trial for him," she observed. "Even for me, he would be a challenge." Next was Galon, Sokka's twin. Benjamin watched as Galon shattered a massive boulder with a single, slow-motion punch. The control was terrifying, but Celia merely frowned. "Beating an inanimate object is a sign of low purity," she remarked with a hint of disappointment. Finally, they found Aphrodite. He wasn't on Celia's list of contenders. Instead of training, he sat alone on a rock, drinking wine and staring at the clouds. "Good luck to him," Benjamin sighed, turning the wheelchair away. "Baron, come have a drink," Aphrodite called out from behind them. "The wine is good, really." Benjamin didn't look back, he simply quickened his pace. The capital city stirred long before the sun dared to crest the horizon. Streets that once lay dormant were now a surging tide of humanity. Merchants, nobles, and even shadowed figures from the Pale Church, all flowing toward a single point. Benjamin stood atop the high platform, gazing down at the sea of people. The arena was makeshift, crude, even, but the crowd didn't care. They clung to rooftops and balanced in treetops just to catch a glimpse. The air, once stale with the city's decline, now crackled with the cries of street vendors hawking champion prediction charts and signed player paintings. High above, in the exclusive VIP seats, Benjamin watched the wealthy settle in. He offered a silent prayer of thanks to Erwin. The revenue from these tickets alone would pay for the entire renovation. Standing beside Benjamin was a chosen one from the Celebration Church, a man whose sole magical gift was to amplify sound. "You can speak normally, Baron," the man whispered. "Leave the rest to me." Benjamin stepped to the center of the ring. For a heartbeat, he was a young handyman again, peering through the legs of a crowd. Now he was the center of the world. "Everyone," his voice boomed, shaking the very planks beneath his feet. "Welcome to the first ever world's #1 Rinpu martial arts tournament." The roar that followed was deafening. "We are here for one purpose," Benjamin shouted over the thunder, "to find the strongest person on this land. Knight or mercenary, nobleman or commoner, human, elf or dwarf, once you step into this arena, you are a warrior." He pointed to a massive banner fluttering in the sunlight. It bore 4 bold characters, #1 under heaven. 100 contestants filed out, a grim, powerful procession of different races and regions. In the VIP section, Benjamin noted the diversity: braided dwarves clutching wine glasses and elegant elves with watchful eyes. He felt a flicker of nerves. If this went wrong, his reputation would burn, but Erwin had no such fears. As Benjamin stepped down, Erwin leaped onto the platform with the agility of a much younger man. "Distinguished guests," Erwin bellowed, ignoring the immediate boos from the crowd. "A moment for our sponsor, the United Commune, your trustworthy partner. From steam-powered crossbows to frost-resistant seeds, mention your participant number for a 10% discount. Get off the stage," the crowd chanted in unison. "We want the fights." Erwin simply bowed, wearing a satisfied grin. Benjamin watched him, stunned. He had taught the man the basics of modern advertising, but Erwin was a natural-born shark. Benjamin finally took his seat. To his right sat Rondor, an exquisitely handsome elf from the Silver Empire. Which contestant does the Baron favor? Rondor asked, tapping a booklet. My choice is Lord Legolas. He once hunted an earth demon alone, fighting for 3 days and 3 nights in the dark. He is skilled, a voice interrupted from Benjamin's left. It was Celia. But his style is for hunting, not dueling. He will find the brackets difficult. The game has begun, Benjamin whispered. In the ring, the warrior Diona faced a burly giant with a greatsword. The giant swung a massive, whistling arc, but Diona didn't flinch. He moved a mere inch, letting the blade graze his chest before his spear flashed like lightning. In less than 10 seconds, the giant's sword clattered to the floor, and Diona's weapon, the sentient blade known as Red Rose, was pressed against his throat. Benjamin smiled, remembering how Red Rose had tried to register for the tournament as a solo entrant just days prior, calling Diona her mount. The 6-day struggle for glory had officially begun. The capital is bustling with life today, but for those beneath the city walls, the world remains cold and damp. In the dungeons of the capital, a place of stone, iron, and rare sunlight, Sylvie and his adjutant sit in adjacent cells. Despite the bars, Sylvie is content. The 3 meals a day are a luxury compared to the penitentiary camps. His adjutant, however, is less satisfied. He had been caught attempting a daring rescue disguised as a food delivery boy, only to find the psychic commander, Benjamin, waiting for him. Benjamin's mental blade had sensed the intruder the moment he stepped inside. The soup doesn't taste good when it's cold, Benjamin had remarked dryly as his soldiers surrounded the would-be rescuer. Now the 2 prisoners pass the time reminiscing, while 50 soldiers stand guard in 3 shifts, their hands never far from their sword hilts. Outside, the cheers of the city are deafening. The adjutant whispers that the commotion is a perfect distraction for an escape, but Sylvie only gestures to the rows of vigilant guards. Sylvie's mind is elsewhere. The scarlet eyes tattooed upon his skin are twitching, dilating, and contracting. Through these mystical eyes, he sees the tournament above not with sight, but by sensing the burning auras of the fighters. He feels a dark presence approaching, a powerful being blessed by a dark master ready to unleash a bloodbath. At the arena, the atmosphere is electric. The stone stage has been shattered and rebuilt multiple times. The next match is a clash of legends, Bishop Galon of the Spirit Garden versus the elven hero, Legolas. Benjamin watches from the VIP section, flanked by the weaver Celia and a frantic elven merchant named Londor. The battle is a blur of speed. Legolas unleashes a barrage of enchanted, curving arrows that zigzag through the air like living things. Galon counters with golden threads, weaving an impenetrable net. The impact of their power sends stone fragments flying, forcing even the wheelchair-bound Celia to stand up in excitement. Galaxy, starburst, Galon bellows. A river of golden light erupts, surging across the ring. The force is so immense it spills Benjamin's tea and blasts Legolas clean out of the bounds. The crowd erupts as the elf falls. While the Spirit Garden bishops bicker over the victory, a sudden, chilling silence falls over the stadium. A new fighter has entered the ring, Rhadamanthes. In a single, brutal motion, Rhadamanthes has punched his opponent through the air, embedding the man into the stadium wall with a gaping hole in his chest. The commentator, Erwin, screams for a doctor as the healer Chesvia rushes to the scene. In the stands, Celia's expression turns grim. She sets down her needlework, her eyes fixed on the man in black armor. He is dangerous, she whispers. I haven't met anyone who can match me physically, until now. Benjamin looks at the mysterious entry on his list, no background, no history, and realizes the true danger of the tournament has finally arrived. Inside the dimly lit office, Benjamin stared at 3 files detailing a trio of uninvited guests, warriors of extraordinary strength and extreme ruthlessness. Chesvia leaned over the desk, her silver hair brushing the documents as she declared with a glint of excitement, "This is a conspiracy by the Pale Church." She dubbed them the Pale Trio, a name Benjamin found strangely familiar, while Ella watched from the side, confused by their dramatic, hero-like posturing. Clement whispered the truth to Ella. They simply had to stop these infiltrators before they reached the finals. The next morning, the tournament grounds were electric. Spectators packed the aisles as the second stage began. The first match featured a priest from the Celebration Church wielding a gem-studded weapon called the family head flail. He boasted of its legendary power, but the moment the match began, Walter transformed his arm into a massive dragon claw. With one swift strike, the priest and his cursed weapon were sent flying into the stands. Walter's only remark, "If the person is no good, don't blame the weapon." Next, Chesvia faced a northern warrior and her giant spirit wolf. After complaining about the beast, Chesvia grew enraged. She abandoned all restraint, unleashing a chaotic storm of purifying fire and blue-white lightning that engulfed the entire arena. The wolf whimpered in terror, and its master was forced to surrender as her spear turned red-hot. Ella's match followed, where she faced a dwarf who had cleverly replaced all his metal gear with stone and bone to negate her powers. However, Ella simply brought her own weapon, a massive, molten ball of orange-red iron, and beat him soundly. As the preliminary rounds closed with Irwin's long-winded advertisements, the atmosphere turned grim. The brackets for the next stage were released. Galon, a warrior of the Spirit Garden, found himself matched against Rhadamanthes, the most dangerous of the Pale Trio. Benjamin warned him of the man's hidden strength, but Galon remained defiant, claiming he possessed a secret technique his brother Sokka did not. Yet when Benjamin later crossed paths with Sokka, the brother offered a cold, contrasting prediction: Galon is going to lose. Confidence, it seemed, would not be enough to survive the coming storm. The three figures known as the Pale Triumvirate stood in the shadows of a temporary encampment, their eyes fixed on the distant, glowing arena. Rhadamanthus, clad in black, form-fitting armor, watched the moonlight dance off the stadium walls with a predatory smile. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "someone will die in there." Minos, seated nearby, criticized his companion's flamboyant display in the preliminaries, but Rhadamanthus remained undeterred. He clenched his fist, imagining the moment the Baron of Frosttown would stand before them. "We need the kingdom to watch their hero die," he declared. The silent Ediano finally spoke, warning of the powerful woman in the wheelchair accompanying the Baron. Rhadamanthus's smile faltered for only a moment. He was a warrior blessed by the Pale Throne. He would not be intimidated by a woman in a chair. The third day of the tournament arrived with a deafening roar. The stands were packed to capacity as the commentator Elwyn gripped his megaphone with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he cried, "Bishop Galon of the Church of the Spirit Garden versus Rhadamanthes from the East." In the VIP section, Benjamin sat with his hands clasped, flanked by the knitting Celia and the focused Rondoir. As the match began, Galon unleashed his flowing light, golden threads as sharp as steel weaving a lethal net. But Rhadamanthus merely shuddered, releasing a gray shockwave that shattered the threads like brittle paper. "A petty trick," he sneered. "Fight like a man." The two powerhouses collided, the air filled with the rapid-fire crackling of fists and knees. Benjamin watched, dazzled, as the stone slabs of the arena trembled under the force of their blows. Though Galon was fast, Rhadamanthus was a monster of pure stamina. Blood began to trickle from the bishop's mouth. Separating for a final exchange, both warriors gathered their ultimate power. Rhadamanthus condensed a black sun in his palm, shouting, "Gray alert!" As a wave of destructive energy erupted in all directions, Galon countered with galactic explosion, a golden torrent of power. The forces clashed, blinding the audience until the gray energy seemed to swallow the gold entirely. Rhadamanthus lowered his arms, basking in what he thought was victory. But the crowd did not cheer, they gasped. Rhadamanthus looked down to see golden light flowing across his chest. He had been trapped in Galon's illusion fist, a mental trap set during their close-quarters combat. In reality, he had stood defenseless, opening his arms to receive Galon's full attack. In a desperate, final surge of strength, Rhadamanthus lunged forward, punching Galon squarely in the chest. The bishop was sent flying, crashing into a stone pillar before collapsing. Rhadamanthus stood alone, his armor cracked and his breath hoarse. "A close call," he muttered. Elwyn's voice finally broke the stunned silence. "Rhadamanthes has won. Congratulations to the victor." Galon was not seriously injured, but the sting of defeat was absolute. Below the ring, Rhadamanthes roared in frustration. Yet the tournament schedule waits for no one. As the referee cleared the shattered stone slabs, the announcer, Irwin, cleared his throat to regain his professional composure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "our second match, Clement of the Pascal family versus minus." Irwin scanned his notes. Minus, like Rhadamanthys, hails from the east. His strength is unfathomable, and his opponent, Mr. Clement, is the Pascal family's trusted butler. Though advanced in years, his swordsmanship is legendary, truly old but still vigorous. In the stands, Ella and Benjamin watched with bated breath. Ella hoped for her butler's safety, but Clement stood before them with a straight back, his white hair gleaming like silver. "Do not worry," he said, his eyes bright with a sharp, metallic intensity. "Aging is a man's romance." As Clement stepped into the ring, he faced Minus, a man with gray hair reaching his waist. Minus sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "Old man, admit defeat. This is no place for you." Clement simply replied, "Young man, do not be so arrogant." In the VIP section, the elf Rondor whispered a name from history, the Edge of the North. 40 years ago, a 20-year-old soldier had beheaded a dwarven general alone. That soldier was Clement. Celia leaned in, revealing the secret of his power. Clement possesses the ability to see several seconds into the future. The battle began instantly. Minus unleashed his mind blade, puppet threads. Invisible strings surged across the arena like a lethal spider's web. To touch them is to lose your soul. Your body becomes a puppet to Minus's will. But Clement moved like a fish swimming against the current. He stepped right, he ducked, he pivoted. The invisible threads brushed past him, never once making contact. Minus grew desperate, pushing his power to the limit until the air was thick with a rain of steel silk. Clement drew his sword. With every strike, Minus was forced back. The stone beneath him crumbled. Below the ring, the spectators watched in shock as the puppet threads failed completely. Finally, Minus snapped. He unleashed a tidal wave of strings, abandoning all defense. Clement's eyes flashed. He lunged. The sword pierced Minus's palm and stopped, the cold tip of the blade resting less than an inch from the young man's eye. Clement's voice was calm, steady, and final. "You have already lost.